Welcome back, everyone. It is a strange comfort to believe our homes are sanctuaries, the one place in the world where we can feel truly safe. But the walls we build can be fragile, and sometimes the most terrifying things are not the ones that are already outside, but the ones trying to get in. In tonight's collection, we will hear stories from people who discovered just how vulnerable they were, from unsettling encounters with strangers to terrifying realizations that they were not alone in their own homes. Before we begin, go ahead and comment below with where you are watching from and what time it is. Now, get comfortable and let's get into the stories. My friend Kate and I have been fishing buddies since we were kids. We grew up in a small town in North Florida, and our sanctuary was a remote spot in a wildlife management area about an hour's drive from home. It was a small, sandy clearing on the banks of the Withlacoochee River, a place that felt like it belonged to us. The river there is slow and dark, stained the color of tea by the cypress roots, and the nights are filled with the symphony of the swamp, the chirping of crickets, the deep bass of bullfrogs, and the occasional splash of a gator slipping into the water. It was our escape. By the time we were in our mid-20s, we had our late-night fishing routine down to a science. We'd show up in the late afternoon and stay until the early hours of the morning, chasing catfish under the stars. On this particular trip, we decided to bring Kate's dog, Colt, for the first time. Colt was a Great Dane, but to call him a dog felt like an understatement. He was a horse. A massive, beautiful animal with a black coat and a chest that came up to my waist. Despite his intimidating size, he was the biggest, goofiest baby you'd ever meet, more likely to lick an intruder to death than anything else. I had been there when Kate got him as a puppy, so to him, I was family. The trip started perfectly. We were catching fish, Colt was having the time of his life splashing in the shallows, and as dusk settled, we got our lanterns out and set up for the night. The darkness in that part of the woods is absolute. A thick, inky blackness that our lanterns could only push back a few feet, creating a small, warm bubble of light in a vast, unseen wilderness. We settled into our chairs, our lines in the water, and Colt lay down on a blanket just at the edge of the light, a huge, dark lump in the shadows. It was around 2 in the morning when we first heard it. Not voices, but a sound that didn't belong. The sharp snap of a dry branch under a heavy foot, somewhere down the trail that was our only way in and out. Kate and I looked at each other, our conversation dying instantly. It was probably just a deer, we told ourselves. But a minute later, we heard it again, closer this time. And then, we heard the low murmur of male voices. A cold knot of apprehension tightened in my stomach. We sometimes saw other fishermen out here, but no one ever stayed this late, and more importantly, no one ever came down that treacherous, root-filled trail in the pitch dark without a flashlight. Colt, who had been dozing, lifted his head, his ears perked, a low rumble starting deep in his chest. A few moments later, 6 men stepped out of the darkness and into the edge of our lantern light. They weren't fishermen. They wore street clothes, jeans, hoodies, and they had no gear. No lights, nothing. They just emerged from the black woods like apparitions. They were all laughing and joking amongst themselves, but it had a nervous, edgy quality to it. The man who seemed to be their leader hushed the others and stepped forward, a forced, friendly smile on his face. "Hey," he said, his eyes flicking from me to Kate, and then around our campsite. "Is that your SUV up in the parking lot?" His question hung in the humid night air. My hand instinctively went to my pocket, where I kept a small folding knife. I knew Kate was thinking the same thing I was. Our gear was replaceable. We were not. If we had to run, we would run. Kate, her voice steady despite the fear I knew she was feeling, answered him. "Yeah, it's mine." "Why?" The man's smile widened. "Our car died just up the road. We were wondering if you had a set of jumper cables we could borrow." The story felt thin, wrong. The access road was a single-lane dirt track. We hadn't passed any other cars on our way in. Kate and I answered at the same time, a unified no. We told them we were sorry, but we couldn't help them. The moment we said no, the entire atmosphere shifted. The thin veneer of friendliness evaporated. The spokesman's smile vanished. "Are you sure?" he said, his voice taking on a hard, menacing edge. "Why don't we just walk up there with you and take a look?" The other 5 men, who had been hanging back, started to spread out, slowly moving to form a semicircle around us, cutting off our path back to the trail. One of them muttered, "Just 2 little girls all alone out here in the dark." We were trapped. The river was at our backs, and they were in front of us. I tensed, ready to fight, my mind racing through a dozen terrible scenarios. And that's when Colt decided he had seen enough. He had been lying quietly in the shadows, a silent observer. Now, he rose to his feet. He didn't just stand up. He unfolded, a massive black shape emerging from the darkness, bigger and more terrifying than I could have imagined. He didn't bark. He let out a growl, a sound that wasn't like any dog I'd ever heard. It was a deep, guttural, rumbling threat that vibrated in the air, a primal warning from a predator. The fur on his back was raised, his lips were peeled back to reveal a set of formidable teeth, and his eyes, reflecting the lantern light, seemed to glow. He stepped forward, planting himself directly in front of Kate and me, an unwavering 4-legged wall of fury. The men stopped dead in their tracks. Their aggressive posturing dissolved into wide-eyed shock. "Yo, that's a big-ass dog," one of them stammered, taking a step back. The spokesman held up his hands. Okay, thanks for your time," he said quickly, his voice now filled with genuine fear. They all turned and practically fell over each other in their haste to get away, scrambling back into the darkness of the trail they had come from. We didn't wait. We reeled in our lines, threw our expensive rods and tackle boxes into our bags, and kicked dirt on our small fire. The walk back to the SUV was the most terrifying 10 minutes of my life. Colt stayed on high alert, trotting ahead of us, his head on a swivel. When we reached a small dirt parking lot, it was empty. There was no other car. There was no sign of the men. We threw our gear in the back, jumped in, and sped away. As we drove down the long, lonely dirt road back to the highway, we didn't pass a single vehicle. Their story had been a complete lie. We never knew where they came from or where they went. That night changed things. Our sanctuary had been violated. We still go fishing, but we don't go to that spot anymore. And I now have a concealed carry permit. Colt saved us that night, but I learned you can't always rely on a 150-pound guardian angel. Sometimes you have to be ready to save yourself. Living the Navy life can get incredibly lonely. You are often in a new place, surrounded by people who are more like colleagues than friends, and finding a genuine connection feels next to impossible. A few years ago, I was stationed at a large base and, in a moment of loneliness, decided to try my luck with online dating. I made a profile on Plenty of Fish, hoping to meet a nice guy. My initial experiences were deeply discouraging. Most of the conversations I had quickly turned lewd, and when I made it clear that I was not interested in casual hookups, the messages would often become aggressive and insulting. It was exhausting, and I was about to delete the app for good. Then, a guy named Derek messaged me. His profile said he was about 5 years older than me and, as it turned out, was also in the Navy, stationed on the very same base. We started talking, and he was the first person who did not immediately steer the conversation in a sexual direction. We had normal, polite conversations about our jobs, our hometowns, and what we liked to do on our days off. He seemed nice, and I was so tired of the alternative that I agreed to meet up with him for a date. There was, however, one thing about him that bothered me. I have always been a bit of a class clown, using humor to break the ice and make people comfortable. But with Derek, my jokes never landed. He would not laugh or even acknowledge them. He would just carry on with the conversation, as if I had not said anything. It gave him an aura of being almost too serious, and it put me slightly on edge, but I told myself I was overthinking it. We made plans to meet on a Saturday night. The night before our scheduled date, I was at home in my off-base apartment, just relaxing and watching TV. My phone rang, and the screen displayed unknown number. I almost never answer blocked calls, assuming they are spam, but for some reason I cannot explain, I decided to answer it that night. I am so incredibly glad that I did. The voice on the other end was a woman, and she sounded frantic, and out of breath. She asked if she was speaking to me, using my first name. I paused, immediately suspicious. I asked who was calling. She spoke quickly, her words tumbling over each other. She said she knew I had a date planned for the next night with a guy from Plenty of Fish, and she was telling me, begging me, not to go. She said he was a rapist. I was completely startled. How did this person know my name, let alone the name of the guy I was supposed to meet? I asked her who she was and what she was talking about. She pleaded with me to just listen to her. She explained that she was an IT specialist for the Navy. She said she had somehow managed to hack into Derek's dating app account and had found our messages to each other, which included my phone number. She claimed she then used my number to look me up in the global Navy directory to find my full name. The fact that she had not only hacked his account, but had also tracked down my personal information was deeply unsettling, a massive violation of privacy in itself. She went on to tell me her story. She said that she had also met Derek on Plenty of Fish a few months prior. He had seemed charming and normal, and she had agreed to go on a date with him. He had taken her to a secluded, private location and then had violently assaulted her. I asked her if she had reported it to the Naval Criminal Investigative Service or her commanding officer. She said no. She was a much lower rank than him, and she was terrified that no one would believe her, that they would say she was lying or that she had asked for it. She was afraid it would destroy her career. After she finished speaking, I did not know what to think. My mind was spinning. Was this a genuine, desperate warning from a fellow service member who had been victimized? Or was this some kind of psycho ex-girlfriend who had hacked his account to sabotage his life? The whole situation was bizarre and terrifying. I wanted nothing to do with any of it. I thanked her for the information, hung up the phone, and immediately sent Derek a message, canceling our date. I made up a vague excuse about not feeling well. I did not want any part of a potential rape accusation, but I also did not want to be involved with a crazy ex who was capable of illegally tracking me down. The next day, my phone rang. It was Derek. He asked why I had canceled on him. I repeated my lie about being sick, trying to keep my voice steady. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then, his voice, which had always been so serious and flat, took on a chilling, knowing tone. He said, "She called you, didn't she?" My blood ran cold. I was so stunned that I could not say anything. I just stood there, frozen in silence. He did not wait for an answer. He just said, "I thought so," and then the line went dead. He had hung up. The fact that he knew that his first assumption was that another woman had contacted me was all the confirmation I needed. It proved that the woman on the phone had been telling the truth. I blocked his number immediately and spent the next several weeks feeling like I was constantly looking over my shoulder, terrified I would run into him on the base. I had narrowly escaped something truly horrible, all thanks to a phone call from a blocked number that I almost did not answer. During my junior year of high school, in 2022, my best friend Sophia and I were captives of the sprawling, monotonous suburbs of Phoenix, Arizona. Our neighborhood was a maze of identical beige stucco houses with rock lawns, all baking under the relentless sun. Life was a cycle of school, homework, and boredom. Sneaking out at night wasn't just an act of rebellion. It was a desperate search for something, anything, interesting to do. It was our only escape from the suffocating quiet of our cookie-cutter lives. I had never done it before. My parents were fairly strict, and the idea of getting caught was terrifying. But Sophia, who had a more relaxed family situation, was a seasoned professional. She had a whole system involving a strategically squeaky window and a pre-planned route through the neighborhood's labyrinth of backyards. On this particular night, a suffocatingly hot evening in late September, our hunger for fast food was a convenient excuse. The real hunger was for a small taste of freedom. I was dressed in basketball shorts and an old t-shirt, completely inappropriate for a late-night excursion in a city that wasn't as safe as our parents wanted to believe. But in the moment, all I cared about was the thrill of the mission. I met Sophia at our designated spot, a dimly lit park a few blocks from my house. We set off on our pilgrimage to a 24-hour McDonald's, our hushed laughter echoing in the unnervingly quiet streets. The air was still warm, smelling of asphalt and chlorine from the backyard pools we passed. Our journey took us along a wide 6-lane road that cut through the residential areas. To save time, we decided to cut through the vast, empty parking lot of a Target that was closed for the night. The lot was a sea of asphalt under the sickly orange glow of the streetlights. As we crossed the street from the parking lot toward the golden arches of McDonald's, we saw a man. He was short, maybe 5.5 feet tall, and was walking with a strange, shuffling gait. He wore a dark blue hoodie with the hood pulled up, even in the heat, and baggy jean shorts. I didn't think much of him at first. Sophia and I were deep in a conversation about a teacher we both disliked, our voices a little too loud in the stillness. But as we walked, Sophia developed the habit of glancing over her shoulder. It was something she always did, a nervous tick born from growing up in a place where you were told you were safe, but your gut told you otherwise. After a few minutes of walking, she linked her arm through mine, her grip a little tighter than usual. "That guy," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "He's still behind us." I glanced back, trying to make it look casual. She was right. He was about 50 feet back, maintaining a steady pace, his head down. I told myself it was a coincidence. This was the main road. Of course, other people would be walking on it. But Sophia was convinced. "Don't walk so fast," I told her, trying to sound calmer than I felt. "If you speed up, he'll know we've seen him." My older brother had given me that piece of advice years ago, one of the few useful things he'd ever told me. As we continued, I started to notice things. When we slowed down, he slowed down. When we drifted closer to the curb, he did too. The coincidence theory was evaporating quickly. The Burger King we were now aiming for, after discovering the McDonald's lobby was closed, seemed impossibly far away. The streetlights seemed to cast more shadows than light. My earlier excitement had curdled into a cold, heavy feeling in my stomach. "Let's cross the street and go into the Target," I said, pointing back the way we came. "It's still open." I had been wrong about it being closed. The lights were on inside. It was our only option. As we waited for a car to pass before jaywalking, I looked back again. He was crossing too, not even waiting for the car, his eyes fixed on us. That's when the laughter bubbled up in my throat, a hysterical, nervous reaction. The sheer absurdity of it all hit me. The very first time I sneak out and I end up in a low-budget horror movie. Sophia, however, was not laughing. Her face was pale, and her eyes were wide with genuine fear. We broke into a run, our flip-flops slapping against the hot asphalt of the parking lot. We didn't stop until we were through the automatic doors of the Target, the blast of cold air conditioning hitting us like a physical wave. The bright, sterile environment of the store felt like a sanctuary. We wandered the aisles for a few minutes, pretending to look at phone cases, our hearts still pounding. We made our way to the front windows and peeked out into the parking lot. The man was gone. Just as we started to relax, a man in a Target uniform approached us. He was older, with a kind face. "Are you two girls okay?" he asked. He explained that he had been on his break in his car and saw us run into the store. He had also seen the man in the blue hoodie who had been following us. He said the man had stopped at the edge of the parking lot and watched us go inside before turning and walking away, back in the direction we had originally come from. Hearing it from a third person, an adult, made it all terrifyingly real. My nervous laughter died completely. This wasn't a joke or a misunderstanding. We had been targets. I called my older cousin, who I knew was still awake, and told her what happened. She agreed to come and get us, along with her boyfriend, who's built like a refrigerator. While we waited, Sophia and I sat on a bench near the entrance, the reality of the situation sinking in. We were two teenage girls, out alone late at night, in a city that had a dark side we were just beginning to understand. My cousin arrived a few minutes later, her car screeching to a halt at the curb. We piled in, the relief so overwhelming it felt like I could finally breathe again. I didn't get in trouble that night. The look of fear on my face was punishment enough. But that walk under the freeway changed something for me. The comfortable illusion of my safe suburban world was shattered. I realized that danger isn't confined to dark alleys and bad neighborhoods. Sometimes it's shuffling along right behind you, under the same orange streetlights you've walked under 1,000 times before. This happened when I was 16, back in 2018. I had a regular babysitting gig for a family friend who had a 6-year-old daughter named Maya. They lived in a big 2-story house at the end of a cul-de-sac, with a large, fenced-in backyard that had a swing set and a small playhouse. That evening, Maya and I were in the backyard, playing on the swings. It was getting dark, probably around 8 or 8:30, and the sky was turning a deep shade of purple. The air was getting chilly, and the streetlights at the end of the driveway had just flickered on. As I was pushing Maya on the swing, I suddenly got this intense, prickling feeling on the back of my neck. The undeniable sensation that we were being watched. I stopped pushing and slowly scanned the area. I looked at the windows of the neighboring houses, the line of thick bushes that ran along the back fence, and the upstairs windows of the house behind me. I saw nothing. There was no one there. The street was quiet, and the only sound was the gentle creaking of the swing chains. I tried to shake off the feeling, telling myself it was just the darkness playing tricks on my mind. But the feeling of being observed persisted, and it made me incredibly uneasy. I told Maya it was time to go inside, that it was getting too cold, and she needed to get ready for bed soon. I got her into her pajamas, we read a book, and I tucked her into bed around 9 o'clock. Her room was upstairs, at the very end of the hallway. After she was asleep, I went downstairs to the living room to watch some television. The house was quiet and still. About 10 minutes into my show, I heard a distinct rustling sound coming from outside near the side of the house. Against my better judgment, I got up, muted the television, and went to the window to look. The motion sensor light on the side of the house was on, illuminating the narrow pathway between the house and the fence, but I could not see anything moving. I figured it was probably a raccoon or a stray cat and went back to the couch, though my sense of unease was growing. Maybe 20 minutes after that, I heard another sound, this time from upstairs. It was the sound of soft footsteps coming from the direction of Maya's room. I sighed, thinking she had gotten out of bed. I got up and headed upstairs to put her back to sleep. When I reached her room, I slowly pushed the door open. The room was dark, but the light from the hallway spilled in, and her nightlight cast a soft glow. I could see her form in the bed, perfectly still. She was fast asleep, tangled in her blankets. I was confused. I was sure I had heard someone walking around. As my eyes adjusted to the dim light, I glanced around the room. The moonlight coming through the window illuminated the space, just enough for me to make out the shapes of her dresser, her toy box, and a small table and chairs. Then I looked toward the far corner of the room, near the closet, and that is when I saw it. There was a shadowy silhouette of a person crouched down on the floor. It was completely still, just a dark shape kneeling in the corner. My brain could not process what I was seeing. For a terrifying second, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me again. But the shape was too defined, too solid. It was a person. My hand, which was still on the door, flew to the light switch on the wall next to it. I flipped it on, flooding the room with bright, harsh light. In that corner, no longer a shadow but a real living person, was a man. He was thin, with greasy, unkempt hair, and he was wearing dirty clothes. He looked just as surprised to see me as I was to see him. Our eyes met for a fraction of a second before he scrambled to his feet and tried to run past me, out the door. Pure adrenaline took over. I did not even think. As he lunged for the doorway, I reacted, kicking him as hard as I could. He grunted in pain and stumbled, which gave me just enough time to run out of the room and slam the door shut, holding it with all my weight. I screamed for help, even though I knew no one was there, and fumbled for my phone in my pocket. I called the police, my voice shaking so badly I could barely get the words out. The police arrived within minutes. They found the man still upstairs. He had tried to hide in the closet in Maya's room. They arrested him, and the story that came out was more horrifying than I could have ever imagined. It turned out the man had been homeless and had found a way into the family's unfinished basement through a small, unsecured window. He had been secretly living down there for an estimated 6 months. He would come and go through the window, and he had been watching the family the entire time. He had watched them in the backyard, and he had been sneaking upstairs at night to watch them sleep. I have not been able to babysit since that night. The image of him kneeling in that dark corner is burned into my memory forever. I am 32 now, but this particular night is still as clear in my memory as if it happened last week. I was 13 years old, and it was one of those first sleepovers that felt like a real taste of freedom. My best friend, who I will call Jenna, lived in a neighborhood a few miles from our middle school that had a reputation for being a little rough around the edges. Her mom was a single parent who worked long hours as a nurse, and on this Friday night, she was scheduled for a late shift, which meant Jenna and I had the entire house to ourselves until well after midnight. This was a thrilling prospect for two 13-year-old girls. Jenna's mom had left us with a stack of cash for pizza and a fridge full of soda and junk food. The plan was simple: eat until we felt sick, watch scary movies, and maybe prank call some boys from our class. It was still bright outside when I got there, a warm late summer evening. We decided to take a walk to a small park a couple of blocks away that had a pond in the center. We sat on a bench, talking about school and everything else that seemed important at that age. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the grass, we started heading back to our house. We were just 1 or 2 houses away when a car slowed down and pulled up alongside us. I did not recognize the vehicle, but Jenna seemed to. She told me it was their next-door neighbor, a man named Mr. Henderson. I figured he was probably in his early 50s. He had a graying beard and was wearing a faded baseball cap that hid most of his face. He leaned over the passenger seat and rolled down the window, a slow smile spreading across his face. He asked us what we were doing, and Jenna, who was always much more friendly and open than I was, happily filled him in on our sleepover plans. She told him all about the scary movies and the prank calls we were going to make. He just chuckled, but his eyes lingered on us in a way that made my skin crawl. Even at 13, I had a built-in alarm system for creepy adults, and it was screaming at me. There was something off about his smile. It did not reach his eyes, which seemed cold and calculating. He was a complete stranger to me, and I was shocked that Jenna was giving him so much information about our night. But she had known him for years and seemed to think he was harmless. Mr. Henderson then leaned a little further out the window, his voice dropping to a lower, almost conspiratorial tone. He noted that Jenna's mom's car was not in the driveway and asked if she was working late again. Jenna, completely oblivious to the unsettling nature of the question, confirmed that her mom was on the night shift and that we had the place to ourselves. The man's creepy smile returned, wider this time. He told us to have fun at our little sleepover and not to get into too much trouble. With that, he slowly drove the remaining few feet to his driveway, pulling in right next to Jenna's house. As we walked up her driveway, I could feel his eyes on us the entire time. He got out of his car and just stood there, watching us until we were safely inside. Once the door was locked behind us, I immediately asked Jenna about him. I told her he gave me a seriously weird vibe. She admitted that he was a bit strange, but insisted he was just a lonely old guy who did not mean any harm. I was not convinced. My internal alarm was still ringing loudly. We ordered a pizza and settled onto the living room floor with a pile of blankets and pillows. We put on a horror movie, something about a haunted house, and spent the next few hours chatting and texting friends on our phones. The night grew darker, and the house, which had felt excitingly empty earlier, began to feel a little too quiet. It was probably around 1 in the morning, well past midnight, and Jenna's mom still was not home. We were both starting to doze off in our sleeping bags, the dialogue of another scary movie droning on the television. Suddenly, Jenna sat bolt upright and muted the TV. She whispered to me that she thought she saw the motion detection light in the backyard switch on and then off again. I sat up, my sleepiness vanishing instantly. We both crept over to the large window in the living room that overlooked the backyard. It was pitch black out there. We waited, holding our breath, but saw nothing. Just as we were about to dismiss it as our imaginations, the bright white floodlight clicked on again, illuminating the entire yard for a few seconds before shutting off. We both jumped back from the window, our hearts pounding. We could not see anyone or anything out there, but we knew something had to have triggered the light. Jenna then had an idea. She said we might be able to get a better view from the basement, which had a low window that looked out onto the yard at ground level. I did not like the idea of going into the dark basement, but I also did not want to stay upstairs, wondering what was out there. We grabbed a baseball bat that was leaning against the wall and carefully made our way to the basement door. We did not turn on any lights, terrified that whatever was outside might see us. The stairs creaked under our feet as we descended into the musty darkness. The basement was a large, unfinished space with a concrete floor. At the far end, there was a door that led directly out to the backyard, with a small window set into it. As we got closer, the motion light flickered on for a third time, and the light spilling through the window allowed us to see our way across the room. We were just a few feet from the door when we heard it, a distinct rattling sound. Someone was trying to open the door from the outside. The handle was being jiggled violently. We both froze, letting out small, stifled screams. Thankfully, the door was secured with a deadbolt, but that did not stop the person on the other side from trying to force it open. Jenna, who was always the braver of the two of us, clutched the baseball bat and crept toward the door. I whispered at her to get back, that we needed to run upstairs and call the police. But she ignored me. The window on the door was covered by a set of thin plastic blinds. Very carefully, she lifted a corner of one of the slats to peek outside. Whoever it was, they were still there, their hand on the doorknob, twisting it back and forth. Jenna lifted the blind, looked through the small opening, and her face went completely white. She stumbled backward, her eyes wide with terror. It was him. It was her neighbor, Mr. Henderson. We both screamed at the top of our lungs. He must have heard us because he immediately held his hands up in the air, a sickeningly calm expression on his face. He shouted through the door that it was okay, that he was not going to hurt us. He claimed he just wanted to see if we were all right because it was late, and he thought he had seen someone running through our yard. We looked at each other, and we both knew he was lying. There was a menacing look in his eyes that told us he was the one who had been trying to break in. Jenna found her voice and shouted at him to get away from the house, or she was going to call the police. He just blinked at us, his calm demeanor never wavering. He repeated that he was just checking on us because he knew we were home alone. Then he put his hand back on the doorknob and asked us to unlock the deadbolt so he could come in and make sure everything was secure. That was when I grabbed Jenna's arm and screamed that we needed to call 911 right now. I yelled through the door that the police were on their way. He glared at us one last time, then backed away from the door, disappearing into the darkness of his own yard. We did not wait to see if he was really gone. We ran upstairs, our feet pounding on the steps, and were met at the top by the sound of the front door opening. It was Jenna's mom, finally home from work. She saw our panicked faces and asked what we were doing in the basement. We both started talking at once, frantically trying to explain what had just happened with Mr. Henderson. She was shocked, but her reaction was not what we expected. She said that since he did not actually break in or hurt us, there was probably nothing the police could do. We begged her to call them to report him, but she just kept saying it was our word against his, and it would not do any good. I could not believe it. I spent the rest of the night wide awake, jumping at every sound. I did not have another sleepover at Jenna's house for a very long time, and I was incredibly relieved when she and her mom moved to a different town a year later. I will never know what his intentions were that night, but I am so grateful we never found out. I have had my fair share of strange experiences, things that I could not quite explain, but none of them ever prepared me for what happened in my sister's house in the fall of 2017. My sister, Megan, was about to have her second child, and I had agreed to come stay at her house for a few days to watch her son, Liam, who was 9 at the time. Her husband, Chris, was going to be with her at the hospital, so I was in charge of holding down the fort. The house itself was an older 2-story home in a quiet, established neighborhood. It had a certain character, with creaky wooden floors and drafty windows, but I had always liked it. The first night was completely uneventful. Liam and I ordered a pizza, watched a movie, and I put him to bed around 9 o'clock. Their dog, a golden retriever named Buddy, slept in his crate in Megan and Chris's bedroom, which was at the far end of the upstairs hallway, past Liam's room. After they were both settled, I went downstairs to the living room, opened my laptop, and started browsing YouTube. The house was quiet, and I felt completely at ease. About an hour went by. I was deep into a video when I heard a distinct sound from upstairs, a door slamming shut. It was loud and sudden, echoing through the quiet house. My first thought was that Liam had gotten up to use the bathroom. The main bathroom was right next to his bedroom, so it made sense. I did not think much of it and went back to my video. A few minutes later, I heard it again, another loud slam. I figured he must have gone back into his room and was just being a typical 9-year-old boy, not caring how much noise he made. Then, maybe a minute later, there was a third slam. This one felt different. I cannot really explain why, but a wave of unease washed over me. Something in my gut told me that it was not Liam. The slams were too precise, too forceful. It was then that I started hearing other noises. There was a dragging, scraping sound, like a heavy piece of furniture being pulled across the hardwood floor of one of the upstairs bedrooms. It was slow and deliberate. My heart started to beat a little faster. Suddenly, I remembered something Megan had told me about the house a long time ago, something I had dismissed as a quirky old house story. She had mentioned that the attic in their house was supposedly connected to the attic of the house next door. They were built as duplexes decades ago and later separated into single-family homes, but some of the original structure remained. According to her, you could theoretically go up into her attic, walk a short distance, and come down a ladder into her neighbor's house. The thought sent a shiver down my spine. I knew I had to go upstairs and check on Liam. I had to make sure he was safe. As I started up the stairs, the noises continued. I could hear the scraping sound, and now I could also hear Buddy, the dog, going absolutely crazy in his crate. He was barking and whining, throwing himself against the metal door as if he was desperately trying to get out. He was usually a very calm dog, so his behavior was incredibly alarming. I crept up the stairs, my hand sliding along the railing. I was about halfway up when all the noise just stopped. The scraping, the barking, everything. The silence that followed was somehow even more unnerving. I continued to the top of the stairs and peered down the hallway. The door to Liam's room was open, and I could see him in his bed from where I stood. He was fast asleep, not moving at all. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. He was okay. However, to get to him, I would have had to walk past Megan and Chris's bedroom, which was at the end of the hall. The door to their room was closed, and the hallway in that direction was pitch black. The idea of walking past that dark, silent room after everything I had just heard was terrifying. My mind was racing, telling me that as long as Liam was safe, that was all that mattered. I was not going to walk down that hallway. I was not going to check on the dog. I turned around and walked back downstairs, my feet moving much faster this time. I sat on the couch, my ears straining for any sound. Just as I got to the bottom step, I heard it again. This time, it was the distinct sound of footsteps running down the upstairs hallway, followed by one final, deafening door slam. I spent the rest of the night on the couch, wide awake, jumping at every little creak and groan of the house. I did not go back upstairs until the sun came up. The next day, Megan and Chris came home with the new baby. After they had settled in, I pulled them aside and told them what had happened the night before. I expected them to be concerned, maybe even to suggest I had imagined it. But their reaction was something I never could have predicted. They looked at each other and then back at me, completely unfazed. Chris casually said that it was probably just the spirit of their old neighbor. I was stunned. I asked them what they were talking about. They went on to explain that the man who used to live in the house next door had passed away in his home a few years prior. Ever since then, strange things have been happening in their house. They would hear footsteps, doors would open and close on their own, and things would be moved around. They had just gotten used to it, chalking it up to a harmless ghost. They were so nonchalant about it that it chilled me to my core. A few weeks after that, my mom was talking to my oldest niece, who was 16 at the time. My niece mentioned that whenever she was in that house, especially upstairs, she always had the intense feeling that she was being watched. To this day, I am not sure what I believe. Was it really the ghost of a dead neighbor? Or was there a living person who had found a way in through the connected attic? All I know for certain is that I was not alone in that house that night. I have never agreed to babysit there again, and I never will. The winter of 2024 was my sophomore year, and it was brutal. Not just the Chicago weather, which was its usual punishing mix of wind and ice, but the academic pressure. I was barely scraping by in my advanced physics class, and with final exams looming, I was in full-on panic mode. My friend Liam and I made a plan to meet at school an hour early on the day of our final to cram. This meant I had to be on an Ella train before the sun was even up. My usual stop was Fullerton, an old elevated station with 2 levels, exposed to the elements. That morning, I arrived around 6:30. The station was eerily deserted. It was that strange lull between the last of the night shift workers and the first wave of the morning commuters. The sky was a dark, bruised purple, and a bitter wind howled through the station's steel framework, making the whole structure groan. I checked the transit app on my phone and saw that my train was delayed due to track maintenance. I was going to be about 20 minutes early for my meeting with Liam. I decided to wait at Fullerton, one stop past the school, rather than wait outside in the cold. I found a spot on a bench on the upper-level platform and pulled out my notes, the pages fluttering in the wind. I tried to focus on the equations for thermodynamics, but the words just swam in front of my eyes. A profound sense of unease began to settle over me, that prickly, subconscious feeling of being watched. I lowered my notes and scanned the platform. It was almost empty. There was an elderly woman huddled at the far end, and a janitor slowly pushing a broom on the lower level. And then there was him. He was standing near the stairwell at the opposite end of the platform. A large, broad-shouldered man dressed entirely in black beanie, black coat, black pants. He was just staring at me. Not a casual glance, but a fixed, unblinking stare. I quickly looked back down at my notes, my heart starting to beat a little faster. I told myself I was being paranoid. But a minute later, when I dared to look up again, he was still staring, and this time, a slow, unpleasant grin was spreading across his face. He had a hand in his coat pocket, and he was rhythmically clenching and unclenching his fist around something I couldn't see. That was it for me. I packed my notes into my backpack, stood up, and walked to the other end of the platform, positioning myself a few feet away from the sleeping woman, hoping her presence would act as a deterrent. It didn't. I glanced back and saw he was walking in my direction, his pace slow and deliberate, his grin gone, replaced by a focused intensity. He was mumbling to himself, the wind snatching the words away, but the low, angry cadence was unmistakable. I decided I couldn't stay there. The lower level was usually more crowded, with access to the street. I started walking, then speed walking, toward the stairs. I could hear his heavy work boots on the platform behind me, keeping a steady pace with mine. I didn't look back. I just descended the cold, concrete stairs, my own footsteps echoing loudly. When I reached the bottom, my stomach dropped. The lower level was just as deserted as the upper one. The janitor was gone. It was just an empty, cavernous space. And then I heard it. The footsteps behind me changed from a walk to a run. He was sprinting down the stairs after me. Pure, unadulterated terror seized me. I looked for the customer service booth, but it was dark, the metal security gate pulled down. I had nowhere to go. My mind raced. If I ran forward, down the long, empty platform, he would easily catch me. In a split-second desperate decision, I darted to the side and ducked behind the wide concrete base of the very staircase I had just come down. I pressed myself against the cold, grimy wall, trying to control my ragged breathing, my lungs burning. A moment later, he hit the bottom of the stairs. I could hear him breathing heavily, a low, guttural sound. I could smell stale coffee and cigarettes. "Where the hell did you go, you little bitch?" He snarled, his voice echoing in the empty station. As I had gambled, he didn't check behind the stairs. He ran straight ahead, down the platform, his footsteps receding into the distance. I stayed frozen in my hiding spot, my body trembling, for what felt like an hour but was probably only 30 seconds. Then, from above, I heard the familiar screech and rumble of a train arriving at the upper level. It was my lifeline. Peeking out from behind the staircase, I saw that the man was now at the far end of the lower platform, looking around frantically. I had one chance. I burst from my hiding spot and sprinted back up the stairs, my legs screaming in protest. I hit the upper platform just as the train doors were beginning to close. I threw myself through the gap, collapsing into a seat as the doors sealed behind me with a pneumatic hiss. Through the window, I saw him. He was at the bottom of the stairs, looking up, his face contorted in a mask of pure rage. Our eyes met for a second before the train lurched forward, pulling me away from him and into the safety of the morning. I was shaking so badly I couldn't even hold my phone steady. I never made it to my study session. I got off at the next stop and called my parents to come and get me. Later that day, after somehow failing my physics final, I learned that the track work that morning had shut down 2 of the 3 lines that ran through Fullerton. My train had been the only one running on that track for over an hour, which is why the station had been a ghost town. A week later, I saw his face again. It was a mugshot on the evening news. He had been arrested for assaulting a teenage girl near another Ella station, just a few miles from Fullerton. Seeing his face on the screen, I didn't feel relief. I just felt a deep, chilling cold, the cold of a near miss, the cold of a concrete staircase in a deserted station before dawn. I was 12 years old in the summer of 2022, stuck in that awkward, uncomfortable phase of early adolescence. I was at my uncle's wedding reception, an event that felt like a special form of torture designed specifically for introverts. The reception was held in a grand, slightly dated ballroom of a hotel that sat on the edge of a golf course in rural Pennsylvania. The room was a cacophony of loud 80s music, the clinking of glasses, and the booming laughter of relatives I saw only at events like these. I was wearing a starchy white dress that my mom had picked out, and it felt like a cage, itchy and stiff. I felt too old to be with my younger cousins, who were chasing each other around the dance floor, but far too young and shy to make conversation with any of the adults. To escape the overwhelming noise and social pressure, I told my mom I was going outside. The hotel had a small, manicured garden area just off the ballroom, complete with a little playground structure and a sandpit. It wasn't much, but it was quiet. I found my cousins already there, their own fancy clothes already showing signs of grass stains. I joined them, careful at first not to ruin my pristine white dress, but the lure of a game of tag was too strong, and I soon forgot about being careful. The sun began to set, casting long shadows across the golf course, and the air grew cooler. After about an hour, we were called back inside for the buffet dinner. I was starving. I filled my plate and sat down at a table with my cousins, away from the main throng of adults. As I was eating, I became aware of one of the servers. He was incredibly tall, well over 6 feet, and he moved with a slow, deliberate pace that seemed out of place with the frenetic energy of the other staff. He had a gaunt face with eyes that seemed a little too wide, and a smile that he flashed at guests that never seemed to reach them. It was a practiced, hollow gesture. He made me feel uneasy, though I couldn't have explained why at the time. When I went back to the buffet line for a second helping of mashed potatoes, he was the one serving them. As I held out my plate, he let the spoon hover for a moment and gave me that same empty smile. "You're a pretty little thing, aren't you?" he said, his voice low and raspy. The comment made my skin prickle. It wasn't a compliment. It felt like an assessment. As he finally put the potatoes on my plate, his fingers brushed against mine, and his hand lingered there for a second too long. His skin was cold and clammy. I pulled my hand back as if I'd been burned, mumbled a thank you, and hurried back to my table, my appetite suddenly gone. I glanced back and saw him watching me walk away. I tried to forget about him. My uncle and his new wife had their first dance. People made toasts, and the cake was cut. The kids, including me, were eventually released back outside to burn off our sugar-fueled energy. As I stepped through the double doors into the evening air, I saw him. He was standing near a service exit, a cigarette glowing in the near darkness, his tall frame silhouetted against the wall. He wasn't looking at the other kids who were screaming and running around the playground. His head was turned, and his gaze was fixed directly on me. I froze for a second, my heart giving a hard thump against my ribs. I quickly looked away and ran over to my cousins, trying to lose myself in their game, but I could still feel the weight of his stare. Later, the party began to wind down. Guests started to leave. The music got quieter, and my family began gathering up gifts and belongings. I was exhausted from playing and desperately thirsty. I saw a water station set up in a small alcove at the far end of the ballroom, near a set of doors that likely led to the service corridors. The area was quiet and secluded. Most of the remaining guests congregated near the main exit. As I walked over, I noticed that same creepy server was there, wiping down a nearby table with a rag, his back to me. I walked up to the water cooler and pressed the button, but nothing happened. I tried again, pressing harder. Still nothing. It was one of those large automatic dispensers, and it was completely silent. I thought maybe it was out of water, but I could see the large jug on top was still half full. I looked around the side and saw that the power cord was lying on the floor. It had been unplugged. Annoyed, I bent down to plug it back into the wall socket, which was located near the baseboard. As I was crouched down, fumbling with the plug, I felt it. A hand, large and firm, cut me from behind, right under my bottom, and squeezed. A jolt of pure paralyzing shock went through me. I knew, without having to look, that it was him. I shot up, stumbling backward, my heart hammering in my chest. He was standing right there, looming over me, that same horrifying, empty grin plastered on his face. He didn't say anything. He just looked at me, his wide eyes gleaming in the dim light of the alcove. I was frozen, trapped between him and the water cooler. My mind was screaming at me to run, to scream, but my body wouldn't obey. I felt like I was moving through water. He took a step closer, and then he reached out and took the hem of my white dress in his hand. My breath hitched in my throat. I knew what he was going to do. The thought shattered my paralysis. I let out a choked gasp and shoved him hard in the chest. It was enough to make him stumble back a single step, giving me the opening I needed. I turned and ran. I didn't just run. I scrambled, my dress shoes slipping on the polished floor. I ran across the now mostly empty ballroom, tears blurring my vision, a raw, terrified sound tearing from my throat. I was crying and screaming for my mom. I saw her near the center of the room, talking to my grandma. I crashed into her, burying my face in her side, my whole body shaking uncontrollably. Through frantic, hiccuping sobs, I tried to tell her what had happened, the words tumbling out in a panicked, incoherent jumble. The moment she understood, her face transformed from confusion to a cold, hard fury I had never seen before. She and my grandma held me close while my dad and uncles, their faces grim, went to find the server. But he was gone. He had vanished as if he had never been there. The hotel manager was called. Apologies were made, but the man had apparently been a temp hired just for the night. I never saw him again. I never wanted to, but his memories stayed with me, a permanent stain on my childhood, a terrifying lesson that monsters don't just exist in stories. Sometimes they wear uniforms and serve you potatoes with a cold, empty smile. Just a few months before this happened, I had finally managed to get out of a really toxic 2-year relationship. It had completely drained me, mentally and physically, and left me with a deep sense of loneliness. Everyone tells you how hard it is to go from talking to someone every single day to suddenly having complete silence, even if that person was terrible for you. I was enjoying the freedom of being single, but I also missed having a companion. Between work and university classes, I did not have much time to meet people. So, like so many others, I downloaded a few dating apps. I decided to try Facebook dating, thinking it might be a step up from the hookup culture on other apps. I set my profile to say I was looking for a long-term relationship, posted a few decent pictures, and waited. After a few days of sifting through spam accounts and guys from different states, I matched with someone who seemed promising. For privacy's sake, I will call him Brandon. He was not bad looking, had some cute dogs in his pictures, and his profile said he was 23 and also looking for something serious. To my surprise, he messaged me first, and we immediately hit it off. We talked about our jobs, our hobbies, and the reasons our last relationships ended. The first red flag, which I foolishly ignored, was when he told me his ex was completely crazy. I've heard that line from guys before, and it usually means they were the ones who caused the crazy behavior. Still, we kept talking, and eventually, we exchanged numbers. Over the next few days, he kept pushing to talk on the phone. I am not a big fan of phone calls, a lingering piece of anxiety from my ex who would always use them as an opportunity to start an argument. I kept making excuses, but he was incredibly persistent. Finally, while I was out shopping with my parents, he called me from a number I did not recognize. It was Brandon. He said he figured since I was not going to call him, he would just call me. I was annoyed, but I tried to be polite. He kept me on the phone for an entire hour, asking a stream of random questions while my parents stood by, looking increasingly irritated. To get him off the phone, I stupidly agreed to meet him for lunch the next day at a restaurant that was about a 45-minute drive for me. The next day, despite my reservations, I felt a little flicker of excitement. I had not been on a real date in years. I got dressed up, did my hair and makeup, and headed out. I texted him when I was pulling into the restaurant parking lot. When I got out of my car, I was surprised that I did not see his vehicle, which he had described to me in detail. I walked up to the front doors and saw him standing there, smoking a cigarette. He looked different from his pictures. He was at least 20 pounds heavier, and he looked significantly older than 23. He had never mentioned that he was a smoker. I brushed it off, telling myself that pictures can be deceiving. We went inside, only to be told there was a 30-minute wait for a table. So we went back outside to talk while he lit another cigarette. He was charming, I will give him that. He knew how to hold a conversation and asked all the right questions. Then, out of the blue, he looked at me and said he had a question, but did not want to make things weird. Before I could respond, he looked me dead in the eye and asked, "So, are you a virgin?" I felt my stomach drop. We had known each other for less than an hour, and this was what he was asking. I gave him a stern no and tried to change the subject, but I was already deeply unsettled. Finally, our table was ready. As we sat down, I asked him what he did before he came to the restaurant. "Oi," he said casually. "I stopped at a local gun store and put a shotgun on layaway." I was so taken aback that I asked him to repeat himself. He confirmed it, and from that moment on, the entire conversation revolved around guns. Every time I tried to steer the topic to something else, he would somehow circle it back to firearms. I do not have an issue with guns, but his obsessive fascination and the fact that he felt it necessary to purchase one right before our first date seemed incredibly weird and threatening. After dinner, he suggested we walk around a nearby mall. In a move I now recognize as incredibly stupid, I agreed to ride with him in his car to save gas, since it was only a few minutes away. As we were walking to his car, which was parked in a completely different lot from the restaurant, I saw it. Tucked into the waistband of his jeans, without a holster, was a handgun. I tried to ask about it calmly. He just replied smugly, "Yeah, I carry," and pulled out his concealed carry card. Something prompted me to ask him his age again. This time, he admitted he was only 20 years old. His entire profile was a lie. We got to his car, which was parked next to a minivan where a family was loading groceries. Brandon got in, took the handgun out of his pants, and started waving it around to show it to me. I looked at him nervously and told him he might want to put it away so he did not frighten the children in the car right next to us. He just laughed and reluctantly put it in the glove compartment. When we got to the mall, he said he needed to grab his jacket from the trunk. He waved me over to the back of the car, saying he wanted to show me something. I cannot make this up. He opened the trunk, and lying there in the open were two big shotguns. My eyes widened, and I just stared at him, completely bewildered. He just gave me a smug smile and shrugged. We walked into the mall, and he had the audacity to ask if he could hold my hand. I told him we should walk a little more first. The night continued with a series of bizarre and controlling behaviors. He wanted to buy shoes, and as he was at the checkout, he applied for a store credit card. When the cashier asked for his first name, I found out that Brandon was not his first name at all. It was his middle name. He had lied about that too. Later, we passed a candy shop. I have a huge sweet tooth, and I looked at it excitedly. He looked me up and down and said, "Sometimes it's better not to give in to temptation." I was furious. I just rolled my eyes and walked away. After walking around for 2 hours, doing only what he wanted to do, he announced he wanted to see a movie. I was too worn down to argue. At the theater, I went to the bathroom, and when I came out, I found he had bought tickets for a completely different movie than the one we had discussed. I was so angry at this point that I went and bought my own drink and candy, refusing to let him pay for anything else. The movie was fine, and he did not try anything, probably because he could tell I was pissed off. When the movie ended, he drove me back to my car at the restaurant in complete silence. He pulled up next to my car and just sat there, looking at me like he was expecting a kiss. That was when he delivered the final manipulative blow. "So, I'm just going to be upfront with you," he said. "I'm not really looking for anything serious right now." After his profile had explicitly said the opposite. After all the lies and the weird, controlling behavior, this was his grand finale. I was so done that I just fake smiled at him and said, "You know what? Me neither." I thanked him for dinner, got in my car, and drove away as fast as I could. Looking back, I realized how many moments that night could have turned into something seriously dangerous. It was a terrifying lesson in ignoring my gut instincts. In the sweltering summer of 2023, my friend Jenna and I, both college students from a small town in upstate New York, decided to take a road trip to Boston. We had tickets to see a band we loved, and we planned to spend a few days seeing the historical sites. We created the perfect playlist for the 5-hour drive, booked a cheap hotel near the city center, and set off, full of excitement for our first big trip with our parents. Boston was in the middle of a brutal heat wave. The sun beat down on the old brick sidewalks, and the air was thick and heavy. On our second day, we were walking the Freedom Trail, trying to absorb some history, but mostly we were just looking for any patch of shade we could find. We ducked into a narrow, covered alleyway between two old colonial-style buildings to escape the relentless sun. In the deep shadows of a recessed doorway, a man was huddled, almost invisible. We barely registered him as we walked past. It wasn't an immediate feeling, but a slow-building prickle on the back of my neck that made me stop. Something just felt wrong. I turned around, and my breath caught in my throat. The man was no longer in the doorway. He was standing just a few feet behind me, having moved with an unnerving silence. He was gaunt, with deeply sunken eyes that were startlingly clear and intense. He wasn't just mumbling. He was making a low, guttural chanting sound, with words that didn't belong to any language I had ever heard. And his focus was entirely on me. It was as if Jenna wasn't even there. I froze, caught in his stare. It felt hypnotic, and I couldn't look away. Jenna grabbed my arm, her voice tight with fear. "Come on, let's go," she whispered, pulling at me. I started backing away slowly, but the man mirrored my every step, maintaining the exact same distance between us, his eyes never leaving mine. His chant grew slightly louder, more rhythmic. We were about to back out into the crowded street when a loud voice broke the strange spell. "Hey, leave them alone." A construction worker on his lunch break was walking toward us, his face set in a scowl. The homeless man didn't flinch or even look at the worker. His gaze remained locked on me until the worker physically stepped between us, shoving the man back. "Get out of here," the worker yelled. We didn't wait to see what happened next. Jenna pulled me away, and we ran. We tried to shake off the encounter, telling ourselves it was just a weird, scary city moment. That evening, we went to a restaurant in the North End, sitting on an outdoor patio to enjoy the slightly cooler air. We started to relax, the memory of the man in the alley fading as we ate and talked. We were just getting the check when Jenna suddenly gasped and grabbed my arm. I followed her gaze across the crowded street. There, partially hidden behind a lamppost, was the same man. staring directly at us. When he saw that we had seen him, he slowly raised a thin, grimy hand and pointed right at me. His face was completely blank, his expression unreadable. A cold dread washed over us. We paid and left immediately, constantly looking over our shoulders all the way back to our hotel. We locked ourselves in our room, thoroughly spooked. It wasn't just that he was creepy. It was that he had found us. Later that night, around 10, we realized we had left our jackets in my car, and the evening had cooled down considerably. We reluctantly headed down to the hotel's multi-level parking garage. The garage was eerie and mostly empty, the air thick with the smell of exhaust. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting long, distorted shadows. As we were walking toward my car, a car alarm suddenly blared from one of the lower levels, making us both jump. It was followed by two loud, echoing bangs that sounded unnervingly like gunshots. Panic seized us. We didn't know if it was a car backfiring or something much worse, but we weren't staying to find out. We turned and sprinted for the elevators, our footsteps echoing in the concrete structure. We jabbed the button and waited for what felt like an eternity for the doors to open. We piled in and repeatedly pressed the button for the lobby. As the metal doors began to slide shut, I saw him. He was standing at the far end of the garage level we were on, next to a concrete pillar, bathed in the flickering, sickly light. He hadn't been there a moment before. He must have followed us into the garage. He just stood there, watching us. As the doors closed to a narrow slit, he raised his hand one more time and pointed. We didn't just check out the next morning. We ran to our room, frantically threw our belongings into our bags, and hurried down to the front desk. We were shaking so badly, the receptionist asked if we were okay. We mumbled something about a family emergency and asked if a security guard could walk us to our car. We got in, locked the doors, and sped out of that garage and out of the city. We didn't stop driving until we were 100 miles away. The image of his pointing finger burned into my mind. I still have no idea how he kept finding us. The restaurant, our hotel, the packing garage. It felt like he wasn't just following us. It was like he knew where we were going to be. When I was 20, my life was a chaotic mess. My fiancé Mark had just left for Navy boot camp, and shortly before that, we had taken custody of my 3-year-old niece, Lily, due to some serious issues with her parents. Suddenly, I was a young, de facto single mom, completely overwhelmed and in over my head. To make ends meet and get some help, I moved back in with my parents in our picturesque little town, nestled in the foothills of the Cascade Mountains in Washington. The town was the kind of place people move to because it feels safe, where kids can ride their bikes down the street and everyone knows their neighbors. I had never felt scared there in my entire life. One sunny afternoon, Lily asked to go to the park. It was a beautiful day, and I figured it would be a good way to get us both out of the house. As we were getting ready to leave, my mom stopped me. She warned me to be careful, telling me about some unsettling posts she had seen on the local community's Facebook page. There were rumors of a human trafficking ring operating out of Seattle that had apparently been expanding its reach into the smaller, wealthier towns in the surrounding area. There had been a couple of reports of men in an unmarked van approaching women with children. I listened, but I admit I didn't take it as seriously as I should have. That kind of thing happened in big cities, on the news, not in our sleepy little town. Still, her warning lingered in the back of my mind as I pushed Lily on the swings. The park was idyllic, filled with the sound of other children laughing. I made a conscious effort to be extra vigilant, my eyes never leaving Lily for more than a second. Everything seemed fine, normal even. Then, all at once, it wasn't. It was a purely physical sensation. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and a cold, electric feeling shot down my spine. Every muscle in my body tensed. It was a primal, instinctual alarm bell, a voice in my head screaming that we were in danger. I started frantically scanning the park, my heart starting to pound. And then I saw him. He was standing near the public restrooms at the edge of the park, partially obscured by a large oak tree. He was a stocky man, wearing sunglasses and a plain gray t-shirt. He wasn't doing anything, just standing there, but I could feel his eyes on us. It was an intense, predatory focus that made my skin crawl. Trying not to panic, I told myself I was overreacting. I scooped Lily off the swing and walked over to the slides on the other side of the playground, hoping to put some distance between us and the man. But as soon as I moved, he moved too, stepping out from behind the tree to keep us in his line of sight. My paranoia solidified into pure, cold fear. This was real. My car was parked on the street, about 50 yards away. The man was closer to it than I was. I took a deep breath, trying to appear calm for Lily's sake. I discreetly pulled my keys from my pocket and pressed the unlock button. I spent a few agonizing seconds calculating my path, trying to figure out how to get to the car before he could get to us. In the end, there was no strategy. There was only panic-fueled flight. I scooped Lily up into my arms, her little legs dangling against my side, and I took off in a dead sprint across the grass. He came after us immediately. I could hear his heavy footsteps pounding on the ground behind me. I didn't dare look back. I reached the car, fumbled with the back door, and threw Lily into her car seat. My hands were shaking so violently, I could only manage to buckle the chest clip before slamming the door shut. I dove into the driver's seat and hit the lock button just as his hand slapped hard against my window, the impact making me scream. Through the glass, I saw his face for the first time without the sunglasses. His eyes were cold and dark. He yanked on the door handle, his knuckles white. I didn't hesitate. I threw the car into reverse and stomped on the gas, not caring if I hit him. He jumped back as the car shot backward. As I spun the wheel to pull away, I saw something that made my stomach drop. A second man was getting out of a beat-up, windowless white van that was parked directly behind where my car had been. He was walking toward the first man. They had been waiting. They had been working together. I didn't call the police. In my panicked state, I didn't know what I would even tell them. A man looked at me. He ran after me. It felt flimsy, like they wouldn't believe me. But I called my parents and Mark as soon as I could, my voice trembling as I recounted the story. The validation came a few nights later. I'd walked into the living room to see my mom watching the local news, and there they were. The faces of the two men from the park were on the screen. They had been arrested for attempting to kidnap another woman and her young daughter from a grocery store parking lot in the next town over. The news report linked them to the human trafficking ring my mom had warned me about. All I could think about was what would have happened if I hadn't listened to that primal instinct, that feeling of danger. What if I had dismissed it as paranoia? What if I hadn't been fast enough? The thought still keeps me up at night. The year was 1985, and I was 6 years old. My world revolved around my grandparents' house in a sun-drenched, working-class neighborhood in East Los Angeles. Every Saturday, without fail, my family would go there. The house was always filled with the smell of my grandmother's cooking, the sound of Spanish music playing on the radio, and the loud, overlapping conversations of my aunts and uncles. It was my favorite place on earth. On one of these Saturdays, my Aunt Rosa, who was 15 at the time, was tasked with walking to the corner liquor store to pick up some soda and snacks for the family gathering. She was in that cool teenage phase where she listened to Madonna on her Walkman and seemed impossibly grown up to me. She asked if I wanted to come with her, and I, of course, jumped at the chance to have a one-on-one adventure with my cool older aunt. We set out on our journey, which was only a few blocks, but to a 6-year-old, it felt like a grand expedition. The sun was high on the cracked pavement, and I made a game of trying not to step on any of the lines. We passed by houses with chain-link fences and yards where kids were playing under sprinklers. As we were about halfway to the store, a car caught my attention. It was a long boat-like car, an old Chevrolet Impala, I think, painted a faded rusty brown. It cruised past us slowly, the driver a silhouette behind the dark, possibly illegal window tint. It slowed down as it passed, and I felt a weird sensation, like unseen eyes were watching us from inside. Then it sped up and disappeared around the corner. We got our snacks, a bag of chips for me, and some candy for her, and started our walk back. As we approached the same spot where we'd seen the car, I noticed it again. The brown Impala was parked at the mouth of a narrow, trash-filled alleyway between two apartment buildings. As we got closer, The engine rumbled to life, and the car suddenly reversed, disappearing completely into the alley shadows. My Aunt Rosa paused for a second, a flicker of uncertainty on her face, but then she seemed to brush it off. "He's probably just letting us pass," she said, more to herself than to me, and took my hand. She was wrong. We were directly in front of the alley when the car door creaked open. A man got out. He was tall and thin, with greasy, dark hair and a stained white t-shirt. He was wearing sunglasses, even in the shade of the alley. He didn't say a word. He just stood there for a moment, and then, with a sickeningly casual movement, he unzipped his pants. He exposed himself to us, a grotesque, pale sight in the dim light of the alley. Then he started to touch himself, a leering, predatory grin spreading across his face. I didn't understand what I was seeing. My 6-year-old brain couldn't process the scene. I just knew that it was wrong, that it was something ugly and forbidden. But my aunt understood immediately. "Oh my God," she breathed, her voice filled with a mixture of shock and disgust. Her grip on my hand tightened like a vice. "Run," she screamed, her voice cracking. "Run and don't look back." And we ran. She pulled me along so fast my feet barely touched the ground. I remember the feeling of being dragged, the sound of our feet slapping against the hot concrete, and my aunt's ragged breaths behind me. I risked a single fleeting glance over my shoulder and saw the man still standing there, watching us, that horrible grin still on his face. We didn't stop running until we burst through the front door of my grandparents' house, gasping for air, tears streaming down my aunt's face. The house, which had been filled with laughter just minutes before, fell silent. All the adults gathered around as my aunt, through choked sobs, tried to explain what had happened, careful not to be too explicit in front of me. I remember my grandfather's face turning a dark, furious red. He and my uncles grabbed whatever was handy, a baseball bat, a tire iron, and ran out the door, piling into a car to go search for the man. They never found him. The brown Impala was gone. After that day, the adults never spoke of it again, at least not in front of me. It was a dark, ugly secret that was quickly buried, but I never forgot. I never forgot the sight of that man in the alley, the feeling of my aunt's terrified grip, or the sound of her screaming at me to run. That short walk to the corner store had stolen a piece of my childhood innocence, leaving behind a permanent, chilling memory of the day I learned that monsters are real, and sometimes they drive faded brown cars and wait in dark alleys. My friend Ethan and I have been best friends since middle school, mostly bonded by our shared obsession with video games. We spent countless weekends at each other's houses, pulling all-nighters fueled by pizza and energy drinks. In early 2024, I was staying at his place for the weekend. His family lived in a large, beautiful 2-story house at the very end of a quiet cul-de-sac in a wealthy suburb of Denver. His dad was very proud of their new top-of-the-line security system, which he claimed was practically Fort Knox. That night, we were deep into a new open-world game on his PlayStation, the hours melting away. Around midnight, we finally called it quits and went to our separate beds in his room. I've always been a bit of a light sleeper. Around 2 a.m., I woke up thirsty and decided to go downstairs for a glass of water. The house was completely silent, steeped in that deep stillness of the early morning. As I entered the kitchen, I felt a cool draft. I glanced over and saw that the sliding glass door leading to the backyard was open just a crack. It was strange. Ethan's dad was meticulous about locking up. I figured he must have just forgotten this one time. I slid the door shut, made sure the lock was engaged, and even reset the alarm panel on the wall before heading back upstairs. An odd, unsettling feeling in the pit of my stomach. I fell back asleep, but not for long. What woke me the second time wasn't a loud noise, but the opposite. It was a muffled thud from downstairs, followed by a single choked-off yelp from the family's golden retriever, Buster. Then, dead silence. That single strangled sound was infinitely more terrifying than any crash or scream could have been. I lay in bed, my ears straining, every muscle in my body tensed. A minute later, the silence was broken by a piercing scream from the end of the hall. It was Ethan's mom. I shot up in bed, my heart hammering against my ribs. Ethan jolted awake, looking at me with wide, scared eyes. "Stay quiet," I whispered, already scrambling for my backpack. I always carried a multi-tool with me, a habit from years of being a Boy Scout. I fumbled for it in the dark, the small knife blade feeling ridiculously inadequate. I crept over to the door and locked it, then urged Ethan to grab his phone and call 911. He shakily dialed, whispering the details of our address and the situation to the operator. His bedroom was directly across the hall from his younger sister Lily's room. As Ethan was on the phone, we heard heavy, deliberate footsteps moving down the hallway. They stopped right outside our door, and for a terrifying moment, the doorknob jiggled. Then, the footsteps moved across the hall. We heard the knob on Lily's door turn, followed by a splintering crash as the door was kicked open. A moment later, Lily started screaming, a high-pitched, terrified shriek that cut right through me. In that instant, I couldn't just hide. I couldn't listen to that happening. I made a split-second decision, unlocked our door, and pulled it open. The hallway light was on, casting a sickly yellow glow on the scene. A tall man dressed in dark clothing was dragging a crying Lily out of her room by her arm. Just then, the door to the master bedroom flew open, and Ethan's dad and his older brother Mark charged out. His dad was wielding a golf club, and Mark held a metal baseball bat. They screamed at the intruder, who let go of Lily and turned to face them, pulling a knife from his belt. The scene exploded into chaos. The hallway was too narrow for a clean fight. As the intruder lunged and swiped with the knife, catching Ethan's dad on the forearm, I reacted without thinking. I didn't try to be a hero and attack him head-on. Instead, I dove low and tackled the man's legs from the side. My shoulder slammed into his knees, and he stumbled sideways with a grunt thrown off balance. The move gave his dad and brother the opening they needed. The baseball bat came down with a sickening thwack against the man's shoulder. He cried out and dropped the knife, which skittered across the hardwood floor. I scrambled over and kicked it as far down the hall as I could. The fight was brutal and short. The man was big, but he was no match for two enraged men and the element of surprise. While Ethan's dad and Mark pinned the intruder to the ground, I ran to check on Lily, who was huddled against the wall, sobbing. Just then, we heard the wail of sirens growing closer. The flashing red and blue lights soon filled the windows of the house. The aftermath was a blur of police officers, paramedics, and frantic questions. Lily had a cut on her arm from where the man had grabbed her, but she wasn't stabbed. Ethan's dad needed stitches for the gash on his arm. Downstairs, the police found Buster in his crate, bruised and dazed, but alive. He had been kicked hard when he started to bark. The most chilling discovery came later. The police determined the state-of-the-art security system had been professionally bypassed. The phone lines were cut, and a jamming device had been used to block the wireless signal to the security company. The sliding door I had found ajar was his entry point. This wasn't a random burglar. Downstairs, they found a duffel bag containing zip ties, duct tape, and a chloroformed rag. This was a planned home invasion, a kidnapping in the making. The intruder turned out to be a known felon with a long history of violent crimes. He was sentenced to life in prison. Ethan's family was never the same after that night. The house at the end of the cul-de-sac no longer felt safe, and they sold it a year later. For me, that night was a brutal awakening. It taught me that safety is just an illusion, and that even the quietest suburban street can become a place of unimaginable violence in the blink of an eye. In the summer of 2022, my dad and I took a trip to a massive all-inclusive resort in the Dominican Republic. I was 14 at the time. It was our first big vacation. Just the two of us, since my mom had passed away a couple of years earlier. So the trip felt important, like a step toward finding a new kind of normal. The resort was a world unto itself, a sprawling paradise of palm trees, turquoise pools, and the constant thrumming beat of music mixed with the smell of chlorine, salt water, and sunscreen. The concrete was always hot under my bare feet. I was a daredevil back then, and my main goal was to conquer every single water slide the resort had to offer. There were slides that twisted through dark tunnels, and ones that dropped you straight down from terrifying heights. It was an amazing trip, a blur of sun and adrenaline. But one incident there carved itself into my memory, a dark spot on an otherwise bright experience. It happened around 6 in the evening. The water attractions were starting to close for the day, and the crowds were thinning out as people went back to their rooms to get ready for dinner. I wanted one last swim, so I headed to one of the large lagoon-style pools while my dad watched from a lounge chair nearby, reading a book. I was the only person in the water, just paddling around, practicing holding my breath, enjoying the quiet. The pool was divided into a large, deep section for adults and a shallow end for kids, separated by a small footbridge. I was in the adult section, my flippers making soft splashing sounds in the still water. As I was doing laps, I thought I heard someone call my name. Thinking it was my dad, I stopped and looked up, treading water as my eyes adjusted to the bright evening sky. It wasn't my dad. I saw a man in a lifeguard shirt walking toward the edge of the pool. He was short and tan, with a muscular build and a bald head. He had on reflective sunglasses that made it impossible to see his eyes, and a whistle hung around his neck. He approached me with a wide smile that seemed unnaturally fixed and didn't quite reach the rest of his face. He told me he had seen me on the slides earlier and commented on my swimming. I thanked him, a little weirded out that he'd been watching me. He then started talking about how he taught private nighttime swimming classes for kids my age. He was really pushy about it, insisting it would be a great way to improve my technique and offering me a special invitation to join him later that night. The idea of a swimming class held in the dark with a stranger immediately set off alarms in my head. I politely declined, saying I was probably too tired. He switched topics, talking about different swimming tricks, but the conversation fell off, one-sided. Then he proposed that he show me how to improve my posture in the water, right then and there. He flashed that same creepy, fixed smile. I fell silent, my gut screaming that something was very, very wrong with this situation. Before I could respond, he suddenly took off his shirt, revealing a torso covered in faded tattoos, and dove into the shallow end of the pool on the other side of the bridge. We were only about 10 feet apart. I had seconds before he could swim under the bridge and get to me. Panic surged through me, and I turned and kicked for the far side of the pool with all my strength. My flippers, which usually made me feel fast, suddenly felt clumsy and slow. I didn't dare look back. I just imagined his hand grabbing my ankle and pulling me under. My lungs burned as I frantically swam, the sound of my own splashing loud in the quiet air. The commotion must have caught my dad's attention. He was on his feet by the time I reached the edge of the pool. I launched myself out of the water and scrambled to pull off my flippers. As I did, I glanced back and saw the lifeguard swimming toward my side of the pool, getting closer to the ledge. I stumbled right into my dad, who immediately sensed my terror. He didn't have to ask what was wrong. He put a firm hand on my shoulder, stepping between me and the pool, creating a physical barrier. I expected my dad to yell at the guy, but he didn't. His voice was level, but it had an unmistakable steel edge to it. "We're good, man," he said as the lifeguard approached. "Time for us to get out." The lifeguard started to say something about the lessons, but my dad cut him off. He pretended to be interested in a get-together, taking the guy's number as a way to placate him, to de-escalate the situation and get us away safely. But I saw the look in my dad's eyes. He was furious. We walked quickly back to our hotel room. About 10 minutes later, my dad's phone started ringing. The lifeguard's name lit up the screen. My heart sank. He called 2-3 times in quick succession. Then a series of texts came through. "Hey man, where you guys at? Party's waiting," followed by a string of question marks. My dad showed me the screen, his face grim, and then blocked the number. The next day was scorching hot, a perfect day for the water slides. I tried to put the incident out of my mind. I was waiting in a long line for one of the tallest slides, about 10 stories up. Bored, I was looking at the crowds below when I saw him. The same creepy lifeguard was monitoring the slides at the bottom. My stomach turned to ice. He hadn't spotted me yet, so I tried to use the large inner tube I was holding to hide my face, but it was no use. He looked up, his eyes scanned the line, and then they locked onto mine. He shouted my name, a gleeful tone in his voice that made my skin crawl. He took a step toward the base of the tower. "Hey, why didn't you guys show up last night?" He yelled up at me. His friendly demeanor from the day before was gone, replaced by a look of annoyance. His question sounded more like an accusation. Thankfully, the line moved, and I shuffled forward, shaking my head vigorously to show I wasn't interested in talking. As I got to the front of the line and prepared to launch myself into the dark, winding tunnel of the slide, I took one last look back. He was still there, staring up at me with that same oily, unsettling smile. I shot down that slide as if my life depended on it, the darkness of the tube a welcome relief. When I splashed into the pool at the bottom, I scrambled out and ran, not even looking back to see if he was there. I never went back to that part of the resort for the rest of our trip. Even now, years later, the image of that man's fixed smile and the feeling of being hunted in a place that was supposed to be paradise has never left me. I have always considered myself a cautious person, maybe even a little paranoid. I am the type to look over my shoulder when walking at night and carry my keys between my fingers. This all started a few years ago when I was 15 and had just landed my first real job as a babysitter for a family who lived just a block away from my house. I worked for them every Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday evening. Since they lived so close, I always walked from their house. It was a simple, quiet walk through a familiar neighborhood, one I had taken hundreds of times without a second thought. The first time I saw him was about a month into the job. I had just finished my shift and decided to walk to my friend Sarah's house, which was a few blocks further away from mine. It was still light out, and I was on Snapchat, sending Sarah a video to let her know I was on my way. As I was walking, I heard the soft whirring of bicycle wheels on the pavement behind me. I glanced over my shoulder and saw a man on a bike, riding slowly. He was not particularly tall, but he had a lanky build and was wearing a dark hoodie that obscured his face. I did not think much of it at first and turned back around, continuing to walk and record my video. I made a left turn onto the next street, and a moment later, I heard the bike behind me again. He had made the same turn. A small knot of anxiety began to form in my stomach. I started paying more attention to him out of the corner of my eye. I purposely slowed my pace, and he slowed down too, maintaining the same distance behind me. Then I sped up, and he immediately matched my speed. My paranoia kicked into high gear. This was not a coincidence. He was following me. Sarah's house came into view at the end of the street, and I started walking as fast as I could without breaking into a full sprint. I did not want to show him how scared I was. He kept pace right behind me. I reached her front door and started knocking frantically. Just as I did, I heard a voice right behind me. It was low and gravelly. "Hey, you better watch out. I'll get you." I spun around, and he was standing there, right at the edge of her lawn, straddling his bike. He had pulled his hood down, and his face was gaunt, with unsettlingly dark eyes. Fear shot through me, but I turned back to the door and kept knocking, harder this time. Before Sarah could answer, he reached down and pulled something out of his pants. For a second, I could not process what I was seeing. Then I realized he was exposing himself to me, right there in broad daylight. Without thinking, I raised my phone, which was still in my hand, and took a picture. In that exact moment, the front door swung open, and Sarah pulled me inside. She saw me shaking and asked what was wrong. I showed her the picture, and she tried her best to calm me down. A week later, I was walking to my babysitting job, and I saw him again. He was just standing on the street corner, watching me. My heart dropped into my stomach. I clutched my phone in my hand and walked as fast as I could to the family's house, not looking back. He did not say anything or make a move toward me. He just watched. This became a horrifying new routine. Every time I walked to work on those 3 days, he would be somewhere along my route, just watching. He never tried anything during the day, usually because there were other people around, but his presence was a constant, terrifying weight on my mind. Then, the family asked me to babysit late one Saturday night until around 10. The thought of walking to their house in the dark was terrifying, so I asked the mom if she could pick me up. She agreed, and for a while, whenever I had a late shift, she would give me a ride. But after a few weeks, I started to feel like I was being a burden. I told myself I was being paranoid and that I could handle it. The next time she asked me to work late, I decided to walk by myself. Before I left, I went into the kitchen and grabbed a small, sharp paring knife from the drawer, tucking it into my jacket pocket. I told my mom I was leaving and stepped out into the dark street. The streetlights in that part of the neighborhood were sparse and unreliable, casting long, eerie shadows. I was about halfway there when I heard a crunching sound on the pavement behind me. My whole body tensed up. I knew it was him. I fought the urge to look back and just started walking faster, my hand gripping the handle of the knife in my pocket. The footsteps behind me grew faster, matching my pace. After a few agonizingly long minutes, I could not take it anymore. I spun around, and there he was, closer than ever before. I did not say a word. I just turned and bolted, running the rest of the way to the house. I told the mom what happened, and she tried to reassure me, saying he probably would not do anything before she left for the night. The very next day, as I walked to work, I was on high alert, scanning every corner and shadow. I did not see him anywhere. I felt a small sense of relief as I walked up to the front door. I knocked and waited. As I stood there, I caught a flicker of movement out of the corner of my eye. I turned my head slightly and saw him. He was peeking out from behind a row of large trash cans on the side of the house next door. He was just watching me, probably thinking I had not seen him. My heart pounded against my ribs. I knocked on the door again, harder this time, never taking my eyes off the spot where he was hiding. The worst encounter happened on my walk home from a late shift. It was around midnight when I left. I texted my mom that I was on my way, and she asked if I could stop at the 24-hour convenience store right across the street from our house to pick up some milk. The store was brightly lit, and I thought it would be safe. But as I walked, he appeared again, falling into step behind me. This time, he started talking. He made kissing noises and whispered horrible things, repeating, "I love you, I would die for you," over and over again. I ignored him and walked into the store, hoping he would leave. But he did not. He stood right outside the front glass doors, staring in at me. I was filled with a mixture of fear and rage. I walked up to the cashier and quietly told him what was happening, that the man outside had been following me. The cashier glanced at him for a moment and told him through the glass to leave. The man gestured that he wanted to come in and buy something, but the cashier just shook his head and told him again to leave. He refused to move. I finally snapped. I walked to the door and yelled at him, "Why are you following me?" He just smirked and said, "I'm not following you. I got my milk, paid, and walked out the door, furious." He immediately started following me again, making the same kissing sounds, repeating the same sick phrases. I spun around on the sidewalk. "Look, leave me the hell alone, you creep," I shouted, my voice shaking with anger. It had no effect on him. He just kept staring at me, a blank expression on his face. I was desperate. I had seen him coming out of the apartment complex near the store before, so I blurted out, "I know where you live. I'll tell your mom about this." He did not even care. I finally reached my house, my hands fumbling with the keys. As I got the door open, I turned back to him one last time and said, "If you ever follow me again, you are going to regret it." He just laughed, a sick gurgling sound. "Oh yeah? What are you going to do?" He taunted and then blew me a kiss. I slammed the door shut and locked it, my back sliding down against it as I started to sob. My older sister found me there, and I told her everything. She's extremely protective of me, and she was furious. She promised she would walk with me to work from now on, and that if she ever saw him, she would handle it. Knowing she would be with me made me feel a little safer, but I'm still so scared. I do not know what he wants or what he is capable of. For my 17th birthday in 2023, my parents decided to take my two best friends, Isabel and Kira, and me to Toronto for a weekend. For three girls from a sleepy suburb, The city was an electrifying world of towering glass buildings, endless streams of people, and a palpable energy that buzzed in the air. We spent the first day in a daze of tourist activities. We went to the top of the CN Tower, swam in the hotel pool, and spent hours at the Eaton Center. It was perfect. That night, after we had showered and changed, a familiar boredom set in. We were in one of the most exciting cities in North America, and we were cooped up in a hotel room. I managed to convince my mom to let the three of us go for a walk. It was almost 11 at night, but she agreed, with the condition that my parents and younger brother would tag along, keeping a respectful distance. So, we set out into the vibrant chaos of downtown Toronto at night. The streets were still alive, a river of headlights and glowing signs. My parents walked a bit ahead of us, while Isabel, Kira, and I followed behind, laughing and soaking in the atmosphere. Eventually, our walk turned into a quest for food. We stumbled upon a multi-story building on Yonge Street that was essentially a vertical food court. The ground floor looked a bit sketchy, with only a few dimly lit stalls and some shady-looking characters loitering near the entrance. We took the escalator up to the second floor, which was brighter and had more options. My parents found a McDonald's and sat down at a table, while my friends and I decided to get ice cream. Kira wasn't hungry, so she went to grab a table for us near the railing overlooking the ground floor. As Isabel and I waited in line at the ice cream place, I noticed a group of 3 men sitting at a nearby table. They were all tall, probably in their late 20s or early 30s, and they were watching us. They leaned in close to each other, whispering, their eyes flicking back and forth between us. I tried to ignore them, but a prickle of unease started to crawl up my spine. Then, 2 of them got up and joined the line behind us. One of them, a man with his hair in long dreadlocks, tapped Isabel on the shoulder. "Hey," he said, his voice a little too loud. "I've never been here before. What flavor do you think is good?" As he spoke, I noticed he was fiddling with a small, unlabeled bottle, screwing the cap on and off. It was a strange, unsettling detail. Isabel, who was naturally friendly and sees the good in everyone, started chatting with him, recommending her favorite flavor. At the same time, the other man, who was wearing a long, white trench coat despite the mild weather, stepped up next to me. "Wow," he said, his voice smooth and practiced. "You're very exotic. What's your ethnicity?" I was immediately uncomfortable, but I mumbled an answer, trying to be polite. "A beautiful mix," he continued, his eyes lingering on me. "You are a very beautiful girl. Can I have your number?" There was no way I was giving my number to this guy. I told him no, but he was persistent, insisting he just wanted to talk. As I was trying to shut him down, I saw the third man, the one who had stayed at the table, get up. He was wearing a beanie and carrying a small, hard-sided briefcase. He made direct, unblinking eye contact with me as he walked to the escalator and descended to the first floor. A chill went through me. The first 2 men were now both focused on me. "I got your friend's Snapchat," the man with the dreadlocks said, turning from Isabel. "Can I get yours too?" I told him no, that I don't give my social media to strangers. He just laughed. Then his friend in the trench coat asked the question that made my blood run cold. "So, are you 2 here all alone, or are your parents with you?" My mind went blank. I couldn't form a response. Thankfully, Isabel spoke up, her voice a little shaky. "Our parents are over there," she said, pointing toward the McDonald's. The 2 men looked over and then looked at Kira, who was sitting by herself at our table, and waved at her. Kira, sensing something was wrong, started to get up to come over to us. But at that exact moment, my parents walked over to her. They told her they were heading back to the hotel and that we could just walk back ourselves since it was only a 10-minute trip. As my parents and brother headed for the escalator, Kira came over to us. "Is everything okay?" she asked, her eyes darting between us and the 2 men. "Yeah, we're leaving now," I said quickly. The man in the trench coat smiled at me. "Okay, bye beautiful," he said. I didn't look at him. I just grabbed my friends and walked back to our table. I didn't want the ice cream anymore. I just wanted to leave. As we started for the escalator, we saw them. The same 2 men were following us, keeping about 10 feet behind. Panic set in. My parents were gone. We were three teenage girls alone in a strange building with two men who were clearly targeting us. We went down the escalator, and they followed. As we got to the bottom, I saw my parents waiting in line at a Starbucks near the exit. The relief was so intense, my knees almost buckled. We ran over to my mom, and I quickly told her what was happening. As I looked back, I saw the two men get off the escalator, see my parents, and immediately turn around and get on the other escalator to go back up to the second floor. My mom, seeing them leave, told us we should just head back to the hotel. We walked out of the building, my parents a few yards ahead of us. And that's when I saw him. The third man, the one with the briefcase. He was standing just outside the exit doors, leaning against the wall, as if he had been waiting for us. He just stared at us with dead eyes as we walked past. As we got further away, I risked a look back. I saw him walk over to a black car with heavily tinted windows that was parked at the curb. He knocked on the passenger window. It rolled down, and he leaned in and said something to the driver. Then he walked away from the car and went right back into the food court building. The car pulled away from the curb and disappeared into traffic. Back in our hotel room, the full weight of what had happened hit us. Isabel started crying. I asked her if she had actually given that guy her Snapchat. She had. She said she was too scared to say no. That's when it dawned on her. She had her location services on. I told her to turn it off immediately. As she went into her settings, she let out a gasp. On the Snap map, the man's Bitmoji was right on top of ours. He was in our hotel, or at the very least, right outside. She blocked him and turned off her location, and we spent the rest of the night huddled in one bed. The hotel room door locked and barricaded with a chair. We never knew what they wanted, but the man with the briefcase and the car with the tinted windows left little doubt in my mind that it was something far more sinister than just getting a girl's number. I am what you might call bisexual, though I've never been a big fan of labels. Back in 2022, when I was 23, I was feeling particularly bored and lonely one Friday afternoon, so I decided to give Tinder a try for the first time. My previous experiences with dating apps had been a disaster, mostly filled with bots and scammers, so my expectations were incredibly low. I created a profile, started swiping, and within about half an hour, I got a match. His name was Ethan, he was 25, and his profile was impressive. He was attractive, and his bio listed interests in gaming and coding, which were two of my biggest passions. I was about to craft a clever opening message when a notification popped up. He had messaged me first. His first message was simple and friendly, saying he saw I was new to the app and wanted to say hi. I responded, and we immediately fell into an easy conversation. We talked for hours about our favorite video games, debated classic sci-fi movies, and geeked out over different coding languages. He told me he was a full-time coder who made an amazing salary working only 4 hours a day from home. It all seemed too good to be true. He was charming, intelligent, and we had so much in common. After a while, he asked if I wanted to hang out that night. I was hesitant at first, but he suggested he come over to my house since I lived alone and he was still living with his parents. Normally, I would never invite a complete stranger from the internet to my home, but he seemed so harmless and genuine that I decided to take a chance. We agreed that he would come over in an hour, giving me some time to tidy up my room and get my gaming PC set up for a guest. An hour later, he sent me a text saying he was on his way. A short while after, there was a knock at my door. I looked through the peephole and saw him standing there. It was Ethan, and he was holding a bottle of red wine and had a wide smile on his face. I had not mentioned anything about drinking wine, but I did enjoy it. As he handed the bottle to me, I realized it was my absolute favorite brand. I laughed and asked him if he was a mind reader. He just chuckled and said that I struck him as a red wine kind of guy. It seemed like a charming coincidence at the time, but looking back, it was the first sign that he had done his research on me. I asked how he was planning to get home if he had too much to drink, and he told me he had taken an Uber. We sat out on my back patio for a while, drinking the wine and talking. He was even more charming in person. We shared stories about our lives, our work, and what it was like coming out to our families. After we finished the wine, we went inside and spent the next couple of hours playing video games. We had a great time, laughing and competing. Afterward, he opened a laptop he had brought with him and started showing me some of the coding projects he was working on. It was all genuinely impressive. Eventually, I had to use the restroom, so I excused myself. I went into the bathroom and, out of habit, did not lock the door behind me. I was standing there when I heard him approach. The doorknob turned and he just walked right in, completely unannounced. Before I could even react, he was behind me, pressing his body against mine and grinding against me from behind. His hands gripped my shoulders forcefully. I was in complete shock. I shoved him off me and tried to play it off as a joke, saying something like, "Whoa, that's a bit intrusive." He just smiled at me, a creepy, knowing smile, and said he just wanted to see how I would react. I was incredibly uncomfortable. I left the bathroom and walked into the kitchen, with him following right behind me. I asked if he wanted some water, needing to put some distance between us. As I reached for the refrigerator door, he pushed himself up against me again, this time from the front, and groped me. He was still smiling that same creepy smile. This time, I was not joking. I shoved him off me hard and yelled at him, telling him we had just met and that what he was doing was completely out of line. His entire demeanor changed in an instant. The charm vanished, replaced by a cold anger. He called me a waste of time and said I had no idea what I was doing. He even accused me of being homophobic. I was stunned. I told him that if I were homophobic, I would not have invited him to my house in the first place. I tried to explain that I found him attractive, but that he was crossing major boundaries. He just laughed in my face and said that in the LGBTQ community, there are no boundaries. Then, just like that, he said he had to go. I felt a wave of relief. I walked him to the front door, and he left without another word, not even a goodbye. I locked the door behind him, my mind reeling from the sudden and bizarre turn the night had taken. I felt violated and confused. I decided to take a shower to try and wash the whole experience away. I got in, turned the water on as hot as I could stand it, and just stood there, letting it run over me. About 5 minutes into my shower, I heard a faint rhythmic clinking sound. It seemed to be coming from the other side of the bathroom door. At first, I thought I was imagining it, but it continued, a soft, metallic tapping. I peeked through the small gap in the sliding glass door of the shower and looked down toward the bottom of the bathroom door. There was a small space between the bottom of the door and the floor. To my absolute horror, I saw something moving in that gap. It was a freaking spoon, being held up to the crack, and behind it, an eye. It was Ethan. He was looking in at me while I showered. I did not know what to do. My mind went blank with terror. I pretended not to notice him, slowly reaching over and turning the shower off. I grabbed a towel, wrapped it around my waist, and took a deep breath, preparing to confront him. I was about to yank the door open when I heard a distinct sound through the door, the click of a phone's camera shutter. A new wave of violation and rage washed over me. I flung the bathroom door open with all my strength. He was crouched there, and he scrambled backward, flying down the hall and out my front door, which I had apparently forgotten to deadbolt. I ran after him and saw him jump into a white Honda Civic and speed away down the street. He had lied about taking an Uber. He had a car the whole time. I have no idea what kind of picture he took or what he planned to do with it, but the thought of it still makes me feel sick. I immediately blocked him on Tinder and spent the rest of the night checking and rechecking the locks on all my doors and windows, terrified that he would come back. When I turned 17 back in 2023, the first thing I did was get my driver's license. That plastic card felt like a key to the entire world. I had an old beat-up Subaru that my parents helped me buy, and it was my chariot of freedom. Most of my friends were still a year younger, so I became the designated driver for our group. It meant I spent a lot of my weekends chauffeuring my best friends, Chloe and Maya, around town. Our routine was pretty simple. Drive around, listen to music too loud, hit up the mall, and then crash at one of our houses. This particular Saturday in October was no different. The air in Washington was getting crisp, and the leaves were turning. I picked up Maya first, and then we swung by to get Chloe. We spent the afternoon wandering through shops, wasting money on junk food from the food court, and talking about everything and nothing. The plan was to spend the night at Chloe's house. Her parents had gone to the coast for the weekend, leaving us in charge of their new, slightly oversized house in a recent development that backed onto a dense forest preserve. We got back to her place as the sun was setting, the sky turning a bruised purple. Chloe's house was nice, but it had that sterile, untouched feeling that new houses have. We hauled our snacks and sleeping bags down to the basement, a huge carpeted space with a massive TV and a sliding glass door that opened onto a patio overlooking the dark woods. We put on some indie rock, drank way too much soda, and ate greasy pizza until we felt sick. After a few hours of this, my stomach started to cramp up. The combination of cheap pizza and sugary drinks had declared war on my insides. I told them I needed to use the bathroom and headed upstairs. The basement, for all its comforts, didn't have one. I had to go to the guest bathroom on the main floor. The moment I closed the door and sat down, a wave of uneasiness washed over me. The house was quiet, except for the faint thumping of the music from downstairs. The bathroom had a small, frosted window right next to the toilet, and through it, I could see nothing but the pitch black of the backyard and the woods beyond. The junk food was taking its sweet time, and all I wanted was to finish up and get back to the safety of my friends. That's when I heard it. A light, hesitant tap on the window right beside my head. Tap. I froze instantly. My first thought was that it must have been a branch swaying in the wind. I tried to dismiss it, my heart starting to beat a little faster. I focused on finishing my business, but my body was tense. A few seconds passed in complete silence. Then it came again, louder this time, more deliberate. Tap, tap, tap. This was not a branch. My blood ran cold. I wanted to scream for Chloe and Maya, but a primal fear kept my mouth shut, telling me not to give away my position. I desperately wanted to run, but my stomach had me locked in place. To make matters worse, I realized my phone was still downstairs on the coffee table. I was completely isolated. A third set of taps echoed against the glass, this time followed by a faint scratching sound, like fingernails dragging across the pane. I was trembling, trying my best to hurry. My breath hitched in my throat. Just as a tear of pure panic rolled down my cheek, I heard a knock on the bathroom door. I nearly jumped out of my skin. "Leo, hurry up," Chloe's voice came through the door. "I really have to go." I let out a shaky breath and whispered, "Shh," as loudly as I dared, pressing a finger to my lips even though she couldn't see me. I didn't want her to talk, to let whoever was outside know there was someone else nearby. Right after I shushed her, the tapping on the window happened again, sharp and impatient. I think Chloe must have heard it because she went silent on the other side of the door. By some miracle, my body finally cooperated. I finished up, my hands shaking so badly I could barely function. I didn't flush the toilet or turn off the light. I just wanted to get out. I slowly, carefully turned the lock on the door, wincing at the soft click it made, and pulled it open. Chloe was standing there, her face a mixture of confusion and concern. I grabbed her arm, put a finger to my lips, and pulled her away from the bathroom towards the basement stairs. I didn't say a word until we were back in the basement with the door locked behind us. Maya looked up from her phone, sensing our panic. "What's wrong with you guys?" she asked. I explained what had happened, my voice barely a whisper. Maya looked skeptical at first, suggesting it could have been a raccoon or some other animal. But Chloe, who knew the eerie silence of her neighborhood at night, believed me immediately. We knew it couldn't be her parents, and she was an only child, so there were no siblings to be playing a prank. We debated calling the police, but what would we say? Someone tapped on a window? We decided to wait, hoping it was just a weird one-off event. We tried to watch a movie to distract ourselves, but the mood was ruined. We turned the volume down low, and every creak of the house settling made us all jump. The faint music from the speakers did little to cover the oppressive silence that seemed to be pressing in from outside. After about an hour of this tense quiet, a new sound shattered the calm. It wasn't a tapping. It was a heavy, rhythmic thump. Thump, thump coming from upstairs. It sounded like someone was trying to shoulder their way through the sliding glass door on the main floor. This time, I was the only one who managed to stay quiet. Chloe and Maya let out terrified screams, and the banging stopped abruptly. The silence that followed was somehow even worse. We knew we had given away our location. Huddled together in the middle of the room, we didn't move for what felt like an eternity. My phone, which I had grabbed from the table, felt useless in my hand. After the initial shock wore off, we decided we had to do something. We had to see if someone was still out there. Arming ourselves with a heavy floor lamp and an iron fire poker from the unused fireplace, we crept out of the basement and up the stairs. The main floor was dark and silent. We moved as a single unit, checking the living room windows, then moving toward the kitchen at the back of the house. The large kitchen window looked out over the same dark yard as the bathroom. We peered out, our breath fogging up the cold glass. At first, there was nothing but the faint outline of the trees against the night sky. We were just starting to let ourselves believe we were safe, that the person had gone. Then, he was just there. Not jumping out or making a sound, but appearing as if he had materialized from the darkness itself. A man's face was pressed against the glass, illuminated for a horrifying second by a neighbor's distant security light. He was pale and gaunt, with wide, unblinking eyes and a grotesque, stretched-out grin. He slowly raised a hand and pressed his palm flat against the window. His gaze locked on ours. Then, just as suddenly, he was gone, swallowed back into the night. We didn't go back to the basement. We sprinted upstairs to Chloe's parents' master bedroom, locked the door, and shoved a dresser in front of it. We stayed there, huddled in the dark, until Chloe's parents finally drove into an area with enough cell service to call the police for us. When the officers arrived, they found fresh footprints all around the house and pry marks on the sliding door, but the man was long gone. The next morning, in the light of day, a detective pointed out something that made my stomach drop. The screen on the small bathroom window had been neatly sliced open at the bottom. My 8th birthday ended, as all my childhood birthdays did, with a sleepover. My house was a chaotic swarm of my siblings and my mom's friends' kids, who I will call Jessica, Ben, and Chloe. After the cake was gone and the presents were unwrapped, we all gathered in my older brother Michael's room to watch a horror movie. I cannot remember for sure which one it was, but I remember getting bored halfway through. I suggested we play hide and seek in the dark instead, and the idea was met with instant, enthusiastic agreement. My oldest brother, David, lost the rock-paper-scissors draw and was designated the seeker. He trudged down the hall to the bathroom at the far end of the second floor to count to 100. To understand the story, you have to understand the chaotic layout of that house. It was a huge, sprawling place that always felt like a labyrinth, especially at night. It was perfect for hide and seek. When David started counting, our group scattered like cockroaches. I decided to go for what I thought was the most genius hiding spot in the whole house. Downstairs, behind a big couch in the main living room. At the time, one of my uncle's friends, a guy named Rick, was crashing with us for a while. He was on the couch when I got there, passed out drunk with an empty bottle dangling from his hand. He was not bothering anyone, so I did not pay him any mind. I squeezed myself into the dusty space between the back of the couch and the wall, my heart thumping with excitement. A moment later, Chloe, Jessica's younger sister, came scrambling into the room looking for a spot. For some reason, she decided to cram into the small space with me. I was a little annoyed, thinking she would get us caught, but I did not say anything. We huddled there in the dark, listening to David's muffled counting getting closer to 100. He shouted, "Ready or not, here I come." And we heard his footsteps start to move through the upstairs hallway. Everything was quiet for a few minutes, and then the drunk guy on the couch, Rick, suddenly started laughing. It was not a normal laugh. It was a loud, hysterical cackle that echoed in the silent room. We both froze. He pointed a shaky finger at the ceiling and slurred, "Oh, look at that. They're coming to get you." They're all coming to get you." His words sent a shiver of real fear through me. It was just a game, but his tone was so strange. I must have made a noise, because Chloe put her hand on my shoulder to comfort me. "You'll be okay, Olivia," she whispered. "It'll all be okay." But her voice was wrong. It sounded distorted and raspy, like it was being played through a broken speaker. It was deeper and had a strange grating quality that was not Chloe's voice at all. I went to look at her, to ask what was wrong with her voice, but my eyes fell on her hand, which was still on my shoulder. Her hand looked long and skeletal, and her skin was a pale, almost grayish color. This was completely wrong. Chloe was an African-American girl with beautiful dark skin. This was not her hand. A thick, cold dread washed over me. I slowly lifted my head and looked at the face of the person crouched next to me. It was not Chloe. Staring back at me was something from a nightmare. It was a gaunt, gremlin-like creature. Its face was dominated by huge, pitch-black eyes that seemed to swallow the dim light in the room. Its ears were large and pointed, and its mouth was a grotesquely wide, lipless slit that stretched almost to its ears. The features were all too big for its small, withered head, making it look like a distorted caricature of a person. I could not breathe. I could not think. I just opened my mouth and screamed. It was a raw, primal sound of pure terror. I scrambled out from behind the couch, knocking over a lamp as I went, and bolted from the room. I did not look back, but I could feel it behind me. I could hear a skittering, scratching sound on the hardwood floors, and I knew it was chasing me. My desperate flight took me back up the main staircase. David and the others must have heard my screams, because they all came running out of their hiding spots. They saw me running up the stairs, as if my life depended on it, and then back into my brother Michael's room, where I slammed the door shut and collapsed against it, sobbing. Everyone crowded into the room, asking me what had happened. I tried to explain what I had seen, the thing that looked like Chloe, but was not her. Chloe, the real Chloe, was there with the others. She said she had been hiding under the dining room table with her sister the whole time, and had never even gone into the living room. David said he had not seen anything chasing me up the stairs. It was then that Michael suddenly gasped and told everyone to look at my back. I could not see it, but I could feel a strange stickiness on my shirt. David carefully lifted the back of my shirt. I heard everyone let out a collective gasp. I later saw it in the mirror. There were 4 massive, deep scratch marks running diagonally from my right shoulder down to the left side of my back. The skin was red and raw, and blood was welling up in the deep gouges. The weirdest part was that I had not felt it happen. I had not felt any pain until that very moment, and then it started to sting, a burning, agonizing pain that made me cry even harder. No one wanted to play hide and seek after that. My sister took me to the bathroom to clean the blood off my back. I was too scared to be alone, so Michael volunteered to stay with me in his room while the others tried to continue watching a movie. He was about to take me back to the bathroom to put some ointment on the cuts when he stopped dead in the doorway. Everyone had found new, less ambitious hiding spots nearby, so the upstairs hallway should have been empty. But Michael grabbed my arm and pointed. "Someone's sticking their head out of David's room," he whispered. I peered out into the hallway and saw it too. A head was slowly peeking out from the doorframe of my oldest brother's bedroom. It was pure white, almost glowing in the dim light of the hallway. It had no hair, no eyes, no nose, no mouth, no features at all. It was just a smooth, white oblong shape at the end of a terrifyingly long and narrow neck. It could not have been any of us. No one in the house was that tall or thin. As soon as I saw it, I screamed again and scrambled back into the room. Once again, everyone came rushing in. This time, Michael told them what we had seen. Everyone agreed that we would all stay in one room for the rest of the night. We piled into Michael's room, locked the door, and stayed there until morning. I barely slept. The scratches on my back burned with a fiery pain all night. The next morning, my sister took me into the bathroom to check on the cuts. She lifted up my shirt, and we both just stared in disbelief. They were gone. There was not a single mark on my back. The skin was completely smooth, as if they had never been there to begin with. We moved out of that house a couple of years later, and I was so relieved. I heard that it stayed empty for years and is now abandoned. I never found out what those things were that I saw on my 8th birthday, but the memory of that creature's face and those disappearing scratches is something I know I will carry with me for the rest of my life. I was 22 when I moved into my first apartment by myself. It was in a quiet, manicured complex that was part of a golf course community in my hometown. The town itself was small, with a pretty low crime rate, and the complex was mostly filled with young families and retired folks. For the first 2 years, it was peaceful. I barely knew my neighbors, and I liked it that way. Then, a middle-aged couple moved into the unit right next to mine. I never formally introduced myself, but the husband somehow knew my name. I figured he must have learned it from one of the chatty older residents who lived in our building. From my very first interaction with him, I got a strange feeling. There was nothing I could put my finger on, just an intuitive sense that something was off about him. Whenever I would see him with his wife and try to make small talk, he would always cut her off and answer for her. It was subtle, but it felt controlling and weird. About a year after they moved in, my boyfriend Mike moved in with me. Not long after, on Christmas Eve of all days, he had a freak accident. He fell off a golf cart and suffered a traumatic brain injury. It was a terrifying time, and thankfully he recovered, but he was not allowed to drive for 6 months. Mike is a workaholic running his own business, and he often works late. This meant that for those 6 months, I was his designated driver, and consequently, I was home alone until 10 or 11 o'clock most nights of the week. Somehow, my creepy next-door neighbor, Richard, found out about Mike's injury and the fact that he was not driving. He must have overheard a conversation or been told by another neighbor. From that point on, I knew he was aware that I was by myself in the apartment almost every night, and that is when his behavior escalated. He started doing things that I am convinced were intentionally meant to scare me. The one incident that I will never forget, the one that still makes my stomach clench with fear, happened on a Tuesday night. I had just gotten home from hanging out with a friend. It was late, around 9 o'clock. As I always did, I sat in my parked car for a bit, scrolling through my phone before going inside. My doors were locked, a habit born out of a general sense of paranoia. After about 10 minutes, I was about to turn the car off when I happened to glance to my far right. Across the parking lot, there was another apartment building identical to mine, with an open-air breezeway in the middle that led to a courtyard. Standing in the darkness of that breezeway was my neighbor, Richard. I assumed he was just walking his dog or maybe taking out the trash. I did not think too much of it and went back to my phone. A minute or two later, I looked up again. He had not moved. He was just standing there, a perfect silhouette against the light from the courtyard behind him. I could not make out his features, but I knew, with absolute certainty, that it was him. I have been taught that if someone is staring at you and making you uncomfortable, you should stare right back. So I did. I locked my eyes on his dark shape, waiting for him to either look away or move. After a few tense seconds, he slowly backed up, deeper into the breezeway, until he was completely swallowed by the shadows. I was officially creeped out. I decided right then that I was not getting out of my car. I was going to wait right there until Mike called me to come pick him up from work, however long that took. I turned the brightness on my phone all the way down, hoping to make myself less visible in the dark car. Not even 5 minutes passed before I saw movement again. This time, he was walking from the far side of the complex, the complete opposite direction from our building. I watched him approach, my heart starting to beat faster. I saw that he was not walking a dog, and he was not carrying a garbage bag. There was no reason for him to be wandering around the parking lot at this hour. He walked on the sidewalk that ran directly in front of my parked car. When he was right in front of my driver's side window, he stopped. He turned his head and stared straight at me. He stared right into my soul for what felt like an eternity, his face a grim mask in the dim parking lot lights. Then, he lifted his hand and pointed at me with his index and middle fingers, like a twisted peace sign being used as a weapon. Without breaking eye contact, he slowly continued on his walk, heading toward his work van, which was parked just a few spots away from my car. There were no other cars between us. He got to his van and opened the side door, taking a ridiculously long time to grab a handful of empty grocery bags. I could not understand what was taking so long. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what was happening. After fumbling around for another minute, he closed the van door and started to walk back in the direction he had come from, which was away from our building. As he passed in front of my car again, he stopped, turned, and stared at me for a second time before continuing on. The parking lot was laid out in a way that the sidewalk formed the shape of an H. Our building was on the left side, and the building where I first saw him was on the right. He walked down the perpendicular path, and I watched as he stopped at least 5 more times between my car and the other end of the parking lot. Each time, he would stop, turn his entire body to face my car, and just stand there, watching me. The feeling of being hunted was overwhelming. A cold chill ran down my spine. I immediately grabbed my phone and sent a frantic text to Mike, telling him the weird neighbor was being a major creep and that I felt like he was deliberately trying to terrorize me. As soon as he called, I drove to get him, my eyes scanning the parking lot the entire way. When we got back to the apartment, I was still on edge. Mike had left something in the car, so as I was walking toward our front door to unlock it, he jogged back to get it. Just as I reached the door, I heard a voice behind me. "Hey there," it said. I turned, and it was Richard, walking up the stairs toward me. He used my name. I had never once told him my name. The sound of it coming from his mouth, after everything that had just happened, freaked me out beyond belief. After that night, Mike insisted on walking me to the dumpster and to the on-site laundromat, even if it was broad daylight. He's usually a much more trusting person than I am, but even he could not deny how predatory and creepy the entire situation was. I will never know what was going through that man's head, but my gut feeling from the very beginning was telling me he was bad news, and I'm so glad I listened to it. In 2018, when I was 16, my world was the greasy, fluorescent-lit interior of a Wendy's in a small, run-down industrial town in Ohio. The town had seen better days. The factories that had once been its lifeblood were now rusted skeletons on the horizon. The Wendy's, situated on the main drag, was one of the few places that was consistently busy. It was my first job, and the pay was barely enough to cover my gas money, but it was my own money. The work was mind-numbingly repetitive, taking orders, wiping down sticky tables, and trying to keep the frost from building up on the frosty machine. I saw a lot of faces every day, a constant stream of customers from all walks of life. Most of them were a blur, but there was one man who stood out. He started coming in every single day, always in the late afternoon. He was older, maybe in his 60s, with a thin, wiry frame and a face that seemed permanently etched with grime. His clothes were ragged, and he always carried a tattered backpack. He looked homeless, but he always paid in cash, usually a crumpled handful of dollar bills and coins, for a small chili and a water cup. He never spoke much, just mumbled his order, and then would sit in the same booth in the corner, staring out the window for hours. There was something unsettling about him. It wasn't just his appearance. It was his eyes. They were a pale, washed-out blue and seemed completely vacant, like he wasn't really seeing the world in front of him. Some of my coworkers made jokes about him, but I always felt a strange sense of pity mixed with a deep, instinctual unease whenever he was there. He became a fixture of our daily routine, the quiet, unsettling man in the corner. On a cold Monday in November, he came in as usual. But this time, something was different. He seemed agitated, his hands twitching at his sides. He didn't order anything. He just stood by the door, staring at my coworker, Javier, who was outside on his smoke break. I was at the front register, and I watched as the man suddenly pushed the door open and started shouting at Javier. I couldn't hear the words, but the tone was aggressive and unhinged. Javier, a tough kid who usually didn't back down from anything, looked genuinely scared. He tried to come back inside, but the man blocked his way, shoving him backward. Javier managed to get around him and stumbled back into the restaurant, his face pale. "Call the cops," he yelled at me. "That crazy old guy just tried to attack me." I fumbled for the phone under the counter. my fingers shaking as I started to dial 911. But before I could even get the first number dialed, the door flew open again. The old man was back, and this time, he wasn't empty-handed. He was holding a small black handgun, its metal finish dull under the fluorescent lights. Time seemed to slow down. The normal sounds of the restaurant, the sizzle of the grill, the beeping of the fryers, the low hum of the drink machine, all faded into a dull roar in my ears. The man raised the gun, his hand trembling slightly, and pointed it at my manager Maria, who was standing at the other register. "Give me the money," he rasped, his voice a dry, cracking sound. All of it. Now, I was frozen, crouched behind the counter with the phone still in my hand. I could see Maria's face, her expression a mask of pure, unadulterated terror. Her eyes were wide, and her skin had gone a ghostly white. She was just a few years older than me, working her way through community college. I had never seen another human being look so afraid. That image is burned into my memory. My training kicked in, or maybe it was just raw adrenaline. I kept my head down and managed to finish dialing 911, my voice a choked whisper as I gave the operator our location. I could hear Maria at the register, her hand shaking as she tried to open the cash drawer. It wouldn't open. The key was stuck. The man took a step closer, the gun now just inches from her face. "Hurry up," he snarled. I thought he was going to shoot her. I thought I was about to watch someone die. But then, with a loud click, the drawer popped open. Maria frantically scooped out the bills and shoved them across the counter. The man grabbed the money, stuffed it into his pocket, and without another word, turned and ran out the door, disappearing into the cold, dark evening. The silence he left behind was deafening. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Maria let out a sob and collapsed against the counter. The police arrived what felt like an eternity later, their sirens a welcome, grounding sound. I gave them a description of the man, the same man I had seen every day for months, the man with the empty eyes. They caught him 2 weeks later, hiding out in an abandoned building a few towns over. It turned out he had a long history of mental illness and petty crime, but nothing this violent. Going back to work after that was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. The corner booths where he used to sit seemed to hold a permanent shadow. Every time the door opened, my heart would leap into my throat. The incident didn't just rob our store of a few $100s. It robbed me of that naive, teenage sense of safety. It taught me that the line between quiet desperation and sudden violence can be terrifyingly thin. I have never been one to believe in things that cannot be explained by logic or science. Even as a kid, I was the one who would roll my eyes at ghost stories told around a campfire. I always needed proof, a tangible explanation for everything. This is important to note, because the one event from my childhood that I can never rationalize away, the one that I cannot blame on a tired mind or the wind rattling a window pane, happened on a cold Friday night when I was 12 years old. It was a planned sleepover at my best friend Amelia's house, something we had done 100 times before. Amelia lived in a sprawling older house that her parents had inherited from her grandparents. It had creaky floors, drafty windows, and a certain weight to the air that old houses often do. We always slept in the massive downstairs living room, a space so large it felt like 2 rooms fused together. On one side, there were 2 oversized, comfortable couches facing a large television and a fireplace. On the other side, separated by about 20 feet of open hardwood floor, was a towering dark wood bookshelf with large glass cabinet doors. The shelves were filled with what looked like old, dusty files and leather-bound books from her dad's work as a lawyer. I had asked her about the books once, but she told me the cabinets were always kept locked because her father said the paperwork inside was important and confidential. That night was like any other sleepover. We ate pizza on the floor, watched a couple of cheesy horror movies that made us laugh more than scream, and talked late into the night about school and boys. Around midnight, I decided to head to the upstairs bathroom to brush my teeth while Amelia set up our sleeping bags on the couches. The upstairs bathroom was at the end of a long, dimly lit hallway. It was an old-fashioned bathroom with a clawfoot tub and a large ornate mirror above the sink. As I stood there, brushing my teeth and staring at my own tired reflection, my eyes drifted to the reflection of the glass shower stall behind me. It was then that I saw something that made my blood run cold. There was a shadow in the shower. It was not a normal shadow cast by the dim bathroom light. This was darker, more defined. I could clearly make out the shape of a small child, a little boy. It had no discernible features, just a transparent yet unmistakable outline. It was perfectly still. A wave of fear washed over me, but strangely, it was not a menacing feeling. I felt a bizarre sense of calm, almost of safety, even as my mind struggled to comprehend what I was seeing. I whipped my head around to look directly at the shower. Of course, there was nothing there. The glass was clear, the shower empty. I shook my head, convinced my exhaustion from the late night was making me see things. I turned back to the mirror, and my heart leaped into my throat. The shadow was there again, in the exact same spot, just standing in the reflection. I quickly took out my contacts, my hands trembling slightly, and looked back up. Even with my blurry, uncorrected vision, I could still see it. A clear, dark shape of a little boy in the mirror's reflection of the shower. That was enough for me. I was officially terrified. I left my toothbrush and contact case on the sink and practically ran out of the bathroom, not even bothering to turn off the light. I flew down the stairs, my feet barely touching the steps, and burst into the living room where Amelia was fluffing pillows. I started telling her what I saw, the words tumbling out of my mouth in a panicked rush. I could not stop the tears from welling up in my eyes. I felt foolish for crying over a shadow, but it had looked so undeniably real. I must have been making a lot of noise, because a light flicked on at the top of the stairs, and Amelia's mom, Mrs. Davison, came walking down, tying her robe. She asked what was going on, and Amelia told her I saw a shadow in the bathroom. Mrs. Davison looked at me, and her expression was not one of concern or disbelief, but of a strange, distant recognition. "In the shower?" she asked, her voice quiet. I nodded, wiping my eyes. We then spoke at the exact same time, a chilling unison. Did it look like a boy? My face must have gone completely white. She looked at me for a long moment, a sad, knowing look in her eyes. "I have seen it before too," she said softly. "He won't hurt you. Don't worry about it." And with that, she turned around, walked back up the stairs, and her light clicked off. She did not try to comfort me. She did not offer any further explanation. She just left me there, my fear now validated and amplified 100-fold. Needless to say, sleep was impossible after that. I lay awake in my sleeping bag for what felt like hours, my eyes wide open in the dark, listening to every creak and groan of the old house. Amelia was fast asleep next to me, but I was hyper-aware of everything. I must have eventually dozed off from sheer exhaustion sometime around 2 in the morning. But at exactly 3 a.m., I was jolted awake by a single deafeningly loud banging noise right next to my head. It sounded like someone had dropped a bowling ball on the hardwood floor from a great height. My heart hammered against my ribs. I did not have the courage to look. I did not want to know what had made the sound. I squeezed my eyes shut, pulled the sleeping bag all the way over my head, and lay there, trembling, until the first gray light of dawn began to creep in through the windows. I woke up the next morning before Amelia, the events of the night rushing back to me. I sat up, and my eyes immediately fell on the floor right beside where my head had been. Lying there was a massive old photo album. It was bound in dark, cracked leather and looked incredibly heavy. I looked over at the bookshelf 20 feet away on the other side of the room. The glass cabinet doors, the ones that were supposedly always locked, were now standing wide open. There was no earthly way that heavy album could have fallen out of the cabinet and traveled all the way across the room to land right next to me in the middle of the night. My hands were shaking as I reached for it. The album was open to a specific page. On that page was a single faded black and white photograph. It was a picture of a little boy, maybe 6 or 7 years old, with a bright, happy smile, sitting on a swing set. When Mrs. Davison came downstairs to make coffee, I told her what had happened. She was certain, she said, that there was no way that album could have moved on its own. She looked at the photograph the album was open to, and all the color drained from her face. "Who is that?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. She reached out and gently touched the picture, her eyes filling with tears. "That," she said softly, "is my brother, Daniel. He died in an accident in the backyard when he was 6 years old, long before we ever moved into this house. I realized then that I had not just seen a shadow. I had been visited by the ghost of a little boy who was still tied to his family, a little boy who just wanted to be seen." My family moved from a quiet, rural town to a sprawling suburb of Nashville, Tennessee, back in 2021 when I was 15. My mom had gotten a big promotion with a healthcare company, and suddenly I was thrust from a place where I knew everyone to a massive high school where I was completely anonymous. It was a serious culture shock. My dad, a musician who was often on the road, wasn't around much, so I spent a lot of my time exploring the new area on my own. Our new neighborhood was a strange mix of established communities and brand new developments that were rapidly eating up the surrounding forests and farmland. One of these new additions was a paved greenway, optimistically called a nature trail, that cut through a patch of woods developers hadn't bulldozed yet. It ran alongside a muddy creek and ended at a graffiti-covered concrete underpass for a new highway extension. It was a sanitized suburban version of nature, littered with discarded beer cans and vape cartridges. One afternoon, I was exploring the trail with a couple of guys I had recently befriended. We found a well-worn path that broke off from the pavement and led down to a small clearing by the creek. There was a makeshift fire pit and other signs that it was a local hangout spot. It felt like our own secret discovery, a small piece of wilderness in the middle of suburbia. I've always had trouble sleeping, my mind prone to racing in the quiet of the night. Sometimes I'd go for late-night walks to try and clear my head. A few weeks after finding the clearing, I was lying in bed, wide awake around 2 in the morning. The moon was full, and I decided a walk on the new trail might help. I slipped out of the house and headed over. The moonlight filtered through the trees, casting long, eerie shadows across the pavement. It was peaceful. As I neared the end of the trail, where it curved toward the highway underpass, I saw the brief flare of a lighter in the darkness ahead. I stopped. 2 figures were standing in the shadows of the underpass, their voices low and angry. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but the tension in their tone was unmistakable. It sounded like a deal gone wrong or a heated argument. A cold knot of dread formed in my stomach. This was something I should not be seeing. I started to back away as quietly as I could, hoping to melt back into the shadows I came from. But I wasn't quiet enough. One of them turned, and his head snapped in my direction. "Hey, who the fuck is that?" a voice barked. It wasn't a question. It was a threat. My brain didn't even have time to process the fear. My body just reacted. I spun around and ran. A split second later, the sharp crack of a handgun split the night air. I heard a high-pitched whine zip past my ear, followed by a dull thud as a bullet slammed into a tree trunk right beside me. The reality hit me like a physical blow. They were shooting at me. I sprinted back the way I came, faster than I had ever run in my life. My lungs burned, and my legs felt like lead. Every shadow seemed to morph into one of them catching up to me. I could hear them crashing through the underbrush off the trail, trying to cut me off. The trail ahead seemed to stretch on for miles, a narrow corridor with no escape. Then I remembered the clearing. It was my only chance. Just as I rounded the familiar bend in the path, I didn't hesitate. I veered off the pavement and dove headfirst into the thick brush, tumbling down the muddy bank toward the creek. I hit the cold water with a splash and went completely under for a few seconds. I came up gasping for air beneath an overhanging section of the bank, shielded by a curtain of tangled roots. My heart was pounding so loudly against my ribs that I was sure they could hear it. I heard them stop on the trail directly above my hiding spot. Their voices were clearer now, laced with panic and fury. "Did you hit him?" one of them said. "I don't know. He just vanished," the other replied. "We gotta find him." He saw our faces. My blood ran cold. One of them started scrambling down the path into the clearing. I saw the beam of a cell phone flashlight cut through the darkness, sweeping back and forth. The beam passed over the surface of the water, inches from my face. I held my breath, the cold, muddy water lapping at my chin, trying to make myself as small as possible. The light swept past. He stood there for what felt like an eternity before his friend called him back up to the trail, saying they needed to get out of there. I heard them run off, their footsteps fading into the distance. But I didn't move. I stayed submerged in that freezing creek for at least 20 minutes, shivering uncontrollably from both the cold and the residual terror. The walk home was a nightmare. I stuck to the darkest parts of the street, jumping at the sound of every passing car. I snuck back into my house, dripping water all over the floor, and lay in my bed until morning. The sound of the gunshots were playing over and over in my head. A few weeks later, I saw a local news report about a string of armed robberies in the area. The suspects were described as two young men. They showed a grainy, black and white security photo, and even though it was blurry, I recognized the build and posture of one of the men from the underpass. I never told my parents or the police what happened. I was terrified the men would find out and come after me. I knew I had stumbled upon something I was never meant to see, and I knew, with absolute certainty, that they had been willing to kill me to keep their secret. My family moved to Canada from Iran when I was very young. This particular incident took place when I was in elementary school, just a few years after we had arrived. We lived in a large rental apartment building that was a common first stop for new immigrants. It was a diverse community with people from all over the world trying to build new lives. One afternoon, my mother, my brother, and I were waiting for the elevator in the lobby when a woman and her daughter walked over to wait with us. The woman was speaking to her daughter in Farsi, but it was a dialect from Afghanistan, not the one we spoke. This immediately caught my mother's attention. She was always thrilled to meet other Farsi speakers, as it was a small piece of home in a new country. She struck up a conversation with the woman. It quickly became apparent that her daughter, who looked to be a teenager, was severely disabled. She could not speak and did not seem to be able to communicate in any way. My mother and this woman, whose name was Fatima, started to run into each other frequently around the building. During their conversations, Fatima began to confide in my mom. She told her that she believed the man who lived in the building was stalking her and her daughter. She described the man as a single father who lived with his young daughter. By a strange coincidence, I actually knew who she was talking about. His daughter was in my class at school, and I had even looked after their dog a couple of times. I knew him to be a quiet, polite man. His daughter had once told me that her parents were divorced and that she lived with her dad. I could not imagine him stalking anyone. One evening, my mom and I were getting out of the elevator on our floor when Fatima approached us. She said it was her daughter's birthday and insisted that we come to their apartment for a piece of cake. I had always felt an unexplainable sense of unease around her, and I did not want to go. But my mother, being the kind person she is, felt bad for them and said we would stop by for just a little while. We followed her into her apartment, and the moment I stepped inside, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. The apartment was almost completely dark, with only a single small nightlight plugged into a wall socket, casting long, spooky shadows. Her daughter was sitting silently on the floor in the dim light. There was no furniture in the living room, just a cloth spread out on the floor like a picnic blanket. On the cloth were a few plates, some forks, and a small, homemade cake. We sat down on the floor with them, and just as we were getting ready to eat, my mom's phone started to ring. The sudden noise made all of us jump. As my mom answered it, Fatima rushed over and frantically motioned for her to be quiet. She put her finger to her lips and whispered, "You must be as quiet as possible. He cannot know that we are home." I felt a chill run down my spine. I knew she was talking about the man she believed was stalking them. My mom apologized and asked her what she meant. Fatima then launched into a terrifying story. She claimed the man who lived in the unit directly below hers was tormenting them. She said he would hit his ceiling with a broom handle at all hours of the night, just to let them know he knew they were there. She told us a story about how he had once lured her daughter out onto their balcony and tried to persuade her to jump off. She claimed he would knock on their door in the middle of the night and whisper the devil's prophecies through the wood. My mom asked her why she had never reported any of this to the police or the building management. Fatima said she was too scared, that she believed he would find out and kill them both. As a result, she said they lived in constant darkness. They owned no television, never turned on the lights, and only ever spoke in whispers when they were inside their apartment. We ate the cake in near silence, the atmosphere thick with tension. When we got up to leave, she tiptoed to her front door, motioning for us to stay back. She slowly cracked the door open and peeked out into the hallway, looking both left and right before turning to us and saying it was safe to go. As soon as we were back in our own apartment, I told my mom that I did not believe her story. I told her that I knew the people who lived in that apartment and that they were nice. My mom simply said it was best not to get involved. Weeks went by, and we did not see Fatima or her daughter at all. Then, one morning as I was leaving for school, I noticed letters had been taped to the walls all over the lobby. I saw another one taped to the building's intercom system by the front door. It was a letter written by Fatima. In it, she described in detail how she was terrified for her and her daughter's lives and how no one would help them. She repeated all the same stories she had told us, but the last paragraph was the most disturbing. She claimed that she had been impregnated by a demon in her sleep, and that this demon had now possessed the man living below her. She wrote that if anything happened to her or her daughter, everyone who had ignored her pleas for help should consider themselves responsible. Later, I asked the man's daughter about it. Her dad told me that he had only ever seen Fatima a few times, and that she was always talking to herself. He said that she would slide notes with Arabic writing under his door, which he later learned were verses from the Quran used for protection from evil. The building management eventually had to ask her to move out, as she threatened to set herself and her daughter on fire. The police had to be called. We moved away not long after that, but I never forgot about her. In 2015, I reconnected with a childhood friend who still lived in that building. I went to visit her and ran into the old building manager. I asked him if he ever found out what happened with that woman. The story he told me was heartbreaking. He said that Fatima was schizophrenic. She had been a victim of a forced marriage at a very young age, and her daughter's severe disabilities were the result of the extreme abuse she had suffered while she was pregnant. Her mental illness was so severe that she wholeheartedly believed everything she had claimed. He also told me that her daughter was actually capable of speaking, but Fatima had completely isolated her from the outside world. We had thought her daughter was a teenager, but it turned out she was a 30-year-old woman. She was malnourished and had clearly not been properly cared for. It was a truly tragic situation,